here. And another issue is okay, there's the figure of floating, and the figure of floating is well, it's obviously it's related to this whole figure of the octopus, and how it emerges in different texts, like for instance Flusser, the Vampyroteuthis, Infernalis, the vampire squid. And in André Breton's analysis, Surrealist analysis of Art Nouveau. So that's already a massive construct. And there's a reason why these come together. I don't think there's any seminar where you actually go from media theory to Art Nouveau, right? So that's what we're going to do. And I think I have to make clear. So what I'll do is I do like a short summary of both talks, and then try to sort of retrace that route of how that actually works. So we're starting with Samuel Butler, and he's really at the core of this, what we would call the prosthetic analysis of technology, right? So the technology is an extension, what McLuhan later calls an extension of man. So he's actually has an actual example of a man with a spade, right? And how that spade, when he's using it, how that actually becomes an extension of the self, right? As what he calls a machinate mammal, right? So this, and he actually starts to talk about machine consciousness as well. And we're talking about the 1860s and 1870s. So this is quite incredible. Right, just after The Origin of Species was published in 1859, you know, there's only 4 years later, Samuel Butler comes with Darwin Among the Machines, and he's basically saying, well, you know, it's not just an extension of man, this machinery, but it's actually a new creature. It's actually a new creature that will evolve. And this machinate mammal, and we'd have to, and I think he was against it. I think you can see that from the later book Erewhon, when we get the 3 chapters, the Book of the Machines, chapter 23 to 25. You know, when you get this cult, like going almost like a Unabomber cult, you know, going against the machine and trying to get away from machinery. But anyway, that's all based on the prosthetic analysis and how that creates an ecology, and also a notion of distributed consciousness. I think that's also important to say, especially in this context, because we'll be talking a lot about consciousness. Then when this analysis lands in the hand of Gregory Bateson, the son of the famous William Bateson, who actually expanded on evolutionary theory, right? There's 3 pillars of evolution. One is heredity, the other is a variation, and there's natural selection. Of course, Darwin is all about natural selection, shaping things, but I think William Bateson was very clear that it's actually variation that creates things, and natural selection that takes out the bad variations, right? So there's like 2 ideas. Of course, it's much more difficult to understand variation than it is to understand natural selection. So that's William Bateson, and Gregory Bateson always built on that work of his father, and brings in the ideas of Samuel Butler. And he says, well, the evolutionary entity is not the single phenotype. It's actually the phenotype plus something of the environment. And this plus is based on the cybernetic analysis of feedback. So we actually talk about not the man with the spade, but the man with the axe, right? So when you're felling a tree, you know, you're extending yourself into the tree, and the tree extends itself into you. So you become like a new loop. Right, and this new loop, that's actually the evolutionary entity. So that's the machinate mammal, actually, but in a construct of cybernetics. So that's very powerful thinking that Bateson evolved, but it comes into a sort of similar consciousness. It sort of becomes what he calls immanent mind, right? For him, nature is always this immanent mind. A sort of pool that we all share, Yes, there is a diminution of consciousness while we prosthetically extend ourselves, but there's also a sharing of consciousness. So in that sense, he's really on the same level as Samuel Butler, but it's a much more precise way of thinking, and I think he constructs it much better in relationship to Darwin. Anyway, my argument is that this loop is actually not symmetrical. Yes, it's prosthetic from the self to the tree, but from the tree to the self, it's actually mimetic. Right, so if we use a hammer, yes, we extend our hands with a hammer, but we also have to mimic the hammer, right, to incorporate the hammer. So we take in the hammer by mimesis. So I call this actually absorptive mimesis, which I earlier called sympathy, by the way. I just want to make the connection between the two. So this sympathetic relationship is actually one of absorptive mimesis. So to actually use a hammer, we have to transform ourselves. We have to shape ourselves according to the image of the hammer, so to speak, to put it in mimetic terms. We have to become percussive. Everything is a nail. That's what we always say, right? When you use a hammer, everything becomes a nail. So that's the mimetic loop. So it's prosthetic and mimetic. So this it's not just a blurring pool of consciousness. There's really something else going on. There's a sort of flickering of a prosthetic extension and a mimetic absorption. Now, I think that becomes more interesting in the hands of Marshall McLuhan because he starts talking about light. And obviously light's always been related to consciousness. So he's really sort of, yes, he refers to Butler a lot, not to Bateson, by the way. It's almost the same period, but it is about light. And I'm not sure if it's because of his Catholicism, because he's so interested in light, but he makes these incredible statements that light is information without content, for instance. That's such a powerful concept, that you can actually structure consciousness before you see something, right? That's his main argument, is that yes, there is content to each medium, and that content is always a previous medium. So on television you would see film, and in film you would see photo. There's always a reference back, and that would be your consciousness. But what you actually just don't see is the structuring of that consciousness, right? So what you see, of course, you read a newspaper in electrical light, we just think back a few years, when you were still reading newspapers. You're reading the newspaper, but obviously you read the newspaper through electric light. And that's a very powerful way of understanding, because this is a form of consciousness that is there, and it's structured in a very powerful form. It's just you don't see it. So you don't properly see that light. It's like you don't see the television when you watch a movie on television. But clearly that the way we look at the way the television is structured has an enormous influence on how you can actually see a movie. So that I think that's very powerful thinking of McLuhan, also because it brings this notion of the prosthetic in a world of light, information, and consciousness. I think what happens then with people like Virilio and Flusser is that they take the position on the other side. If they say yes, there is a diminution of consciousness, there is a form of numbness, there is this lowering of consciousness by extension, they actually take that position and look almost like backward. They actually take that position of this diminution of consciousness and then start seeing things. I think that's sort of what Virilio does. He actually looks at the medium itself. And I think he does that very clearly, especially in the Esthétique de la Disparition, because he's looking at early film and how early film was structured, and he looks at Etienne Jules Marais, and I think I use that image in the lectures, how Etienne Jules Marais actually dressed somebody in black put white lines on the limbs, singular lines, put white dots on the joints, and then have that person run against the black background, and then put these photos together and actually then see a diagram of how the limbs move over time. So what we get there is a transformation of image to diagram. He's actually using film to understand movement itself. Instead of like a bunch of moving images, he's actually showing a diagram of movement. What's the form of movement? It's really, again, this not seeing, trying to see the not seen, right? Trying to see the not seeing. I think that's what's very powerful in Virilio, and that brings him to all these experiences of this black and white flickering. So he starts like, okay, there's this black and white of the diagram, and then we get the black and white of Fred Astaire. Suddenly he moves to Art Deco, where we get this black and white marble of the stairs, and of course the movie is in black and white, and then the tuxedo of Fred Astaire is in black and white, and then Ginger Rogers in black and white, and they're dancing together, cheek to cheek, and they're in heaven. So suddenly this position of numbness or narcosis becomes a position of bliss, right? You start seeing things. And then we go to Dostoevsky with his epileptic grand mals, and we go to Bernadette in the cave seeing the white lady, again in white. It's just a beautiful, it's a techno-Catholic construction, obviously, to see these apparitions coming from technology, but it's a very interesting construct. Why? Because it's not imagination. It's not imagination from a human. It's an imagination from a human, a machine construct, right? So he takes the technological position, right? So not from the self to an extension, but actually from that extension back, right? Seeing images and almost like looking at the medium itself or at the structure of the medium. And there we enter a whole world of epilepsy, hallucination, vision, psychedelics. And I think that's what we're going to see here. There's this whole variation, this whole aesthetic of what's actually there. And that's quite different than saying, well, technology and it sort of takes away our freedom and it makes us numb, and narcosis means pure sleep, and it's basically the small death of technology. They're actually saying, no, there's actually something else is going on. And I think I think in that sense you also have to read Flusser. As of course we get this heavenly image of Virilio. We get Santa Bernadette of Lourdes, and we get the deeply Christian Dostoevsky and the idiot, Prince Mishkin, and get all these figures, and then we suddenly get Flusser, and we're in hell, and the Vampyroteuthis Infernalis, the vampire squid from hell, and what is that? It's actually now we become the medium, right? We dress ourselves in the screen. That's what the bioluminescent squid is. We actually start to take place in darkness itself, So it's not just we're seeing things against the dark background. We're actually ourselves against the dark background, and we start to become luminous. Right, so there's a huge set of transformations, going from some Samuel Butler to Willem Flusser, but as a construct of how they actually place the understanding of extension to absorption, and what it actually means for consciousness is a very interesting route. And then we with the octopus, so suddenly we're in this world that is groundless. We're submerged. We're in the world of the subconscious. We're submerged, and we're groundless, right? Our tentacles go in all directions, and there's no up and down. There's no phenomenology. Thank you. There's no horizon. There's no horizon, and our body is disembodied, as Godfrey Smith says. There's no way you can put the experiences of the octopus back into the body of the octopus itself. Why? Because the poor thing is colorblind. It's just amazing thing to understand. It's just that the octopus itself is colorblind while he or she takes on all these color patterns. How is that possible? Where's consciousness at this point? Where does that transformation of bioluminescence happen? Well, on the skin itself. So the skin is now this thinnest film of consciousness where all the images appear. Well, images or patterns in this case. It's just a beautiful construct by Peter Godfrey Smith, is trying to understand just like, okay, what would actually, because I know from the Vampyroteuthis analysis of Flusser, it's still trying to make a phenomenological understanding of it. And Godfrey Smith tries to do the same. He says, basically, there's no core. There's no core. This creature is so soft, it doesn't have a form. You cannot place the experiences of the octopus in the self of the octopus. Well, that's quite a shocking thing, especially from the viewpoint of the Grace machine, because what we have now is a creature made of light and only limbs. It's almost like, according to Sabri's torso limb index, I think we're on the most extreme pole of having a figure that's almost only made out of limbs, and that has all its consciousness in its limbs, but not in its head. which I find pretty stunning, And then we go floop to André Breton, and he says, guys, the central figure of Art Nouveau is the octopus of Lautréamont and the silky gaze. And we know why he has this silky gaze, because the poor thing is colorblind. So this it doesn't properly see. And it places all, of course, in this idea of the automatic message, the message automatique. So what does that mean? Well, we are the medium. We are the machine, right? So that's what the octopus is, according to André Breton. It's you're living in this groundless world of multi-coiled worlds. It's the water is not a Cartesian system. I think that's already clear from Flusser. It's not a Cartesian, and I think it calls it an endoskeleton. It's not up, down, left, right, back, front in all directions. There's no X, Y, and Z. It's just a world of multiple coils. From one coil to another. So we immediately understand why the octopus looks like the way it does. And we are in the world of submergence and tentacles. And it's a pretty extreme understanding of Art Nouveau. And André Breton, I don't think he's the only one, maybe the first one, who links Art Nouveau to this experience of being submerged. I think I'm not sure how many of you actually visited the palaces in Brussels and Paris, but it's a very powerful motion when you get there. It's like everything's underwater, you're underwater, and though of course we are in a building, with floors and walls that are still like vertical and horizontal, it has this very strong feeling of being a submerged. Also because the daylight is often at the top, we get often a glass roof in these palaces. The colors are often gradient from dark to light. And then, of course, the columns act like water plants, and the lampposts act like water plants, and the balusters of the railings act the same way. So we get this grounding on one side. We still get sort of a sense of the vertical, which we call the whiplash figure. There's still this vertical, and then it starts to unravel and go in many directions. And it's very, very intelligent. I mean, from an architectural point of view, this is one of the architectures that's the most intelligent in connecting structure to ornament. Normally, you would say, okay, we set up structure first, and then we add the ornament, which is, of course, the classical Alberti. We get the schematics of structure and work and ergon, and then we add the parergon. That's not the case here. It's an actual transformation. So we've got the vertical transforming into multiple curvature. It's not that it becomes astructural there, because there's always sneaky ways of these curves interlacing, bouncing, connecting, and merging with each other. There's often a very smart system of those interweavings, making very complex connections. So it's not astructural. So it's not as whirly as André Breton wants to make us believe. Obviously, it is very interested in how the vertical transformed into this sort of multicoiled world of submergence. Anyway, the argument is I think it's important to repeat again this. There's two notions of liquid in Art Nouveau. One is that sense of being underwater. The other is that of the mold. In lots of theories, the mold has a bad name, right? We have to go think morphogenetically and not hylomorphically, but yes, it is a very intelligent hylomorphic system. And why? Because there's a lot of transformations. There's not just a simple mold. There's a lot of transformations between the original sculpture, the wax model, the lost wax, how you get the bronze or the cast iron in, so, and the intensity of solidifying and liquefying. If you would study that in steps, you get something that is extremely complicated, much more complicated than, let's say, the Japanese sword that Manuel de Landa always sort of tries to refer to. So and we get this notion of the image. I think that we should not take this lightly. Of course, Benjamin tries to say, okay, they're still in the world of mimicry or mimesis, because it's the as-if world of Wenger. But this is as-if is not as simple as he thinks. It's a whole world of images. And they select out images with the mold, and that selection needs to work with the whiplash, with this whole set of very complex figures, and how that actually addresses the image, and how it can adapt and create sort of a world of imagery, almost like the octopus itself, how it selects out certain images and how it can become luminescent or luminous. Now, I think we have to talk about Walter Benjamin, and in that sense also about Peter Sloterdijk, because their argument is not that far from submergence, because it's the glass house, and the glass house becomes the arcade. So the glass house as the model of world capitalism, of globalism, you put like a huge glass house over everything, and then the objects start to shine. They become fetishes. Right, so that's the Marxian model. They become commodities. They start to like interact with each other and shine to attract attention. But this attracting of attention and this being under a glass house, especially in the development of Art Nouveau, becomes something very, very complex. First of all, the arcade is really an interior. Of course, Sloterdijk says this. It's an exterior as an interior. And that's not so easy in architecture. That's not a small thing. And then that idea of how that is a street, that means there's a flow of people. But that flow of people is really, well, I wouldn't say seduced, but they're being led away from the daylit streets, right? The daylit streets of Baron Haussmann. They're being sort of making shortcuts between those systems. And then suddenly you're into the labyrinth. That's almost like a situationist model. You're into the labyrinth of the arcade. And then again, we get this sort of shining of figures. But the shining is now much more aware of being under the glass, almost like an aquarium, and starts to behave like that. So we get this jewelry, we get the shining, we get the curling and the becoming ornament. Why? Because there's no gravity. You know, you don't have to deal with structure. You can basically just shine in all directions. It's really quite stunning. You know, this model, if gravity is in all directions and suddenly you lose the vertical, yes, what's left over is the ornament. So that's that the arcade fills itself, you know, not just with the flowing masses and the flaneurs, but also with these shining objects that are like lifted in that medium, of submergence. So we get like we're in a world suddenly, and I think that's where suddenly you know, Benjamin becomes very critical, because the Freudian analysis of the fetish is very close to the Marxian analysis, the Marxist analysis of the fetish as a stand-in, as a fantasy of castration. Right, and that becomes a very negative model for Walter Benjamin. I think we could actually transform that. Instead of, I mean, it's quite clear that Walter Benjamin talking about the hollow space and the case, the velvet case, the red velvet case where you put in the compass, which is for him a little coffin or even a little soft grave, you know. But I speak about it as a soft mirror. I actually speak about it as a mold, and that mold is productive. It's soft and it's productive. So that house is actually capable, that soft house is actually capable of producing a whole range of images. And I think that's where it's correct to actually call it psychedelic. So we get to a level, it's like how psychoactive can a house be? And how psychoactive does it need to be? And that's what we'll be discussing also in relationship to J.G. Ballard's house, where Gloria is a sort of a soft automaton. We'll also be discussing Olympia, the hard automaton, the hard robot, which is the reference of Walter Benjamin. Basically, for him, the figure of Art Nouveau is the hard robot, Olympia. I think it's interesting to use two words. One is liquidering or liquidation. So that it means a killing off, but it also means a making liquid. And I think that's quite correct. It's a making liquid of fertility. And but he also means it as something that's frigid. Now, Art Nouveau doesn't have any problem with frigidity. You know, we know there's a whole range of a fin de siècle of frigid women, which are actually understood as very productive. Yes, it is a figure of death. Yes, it is a figure of death, but death is, in this case, it's really a form of transforming. And I think in that sense, Sternberger, who's quoted pretty often by Walter Benjamin, Sternberger is quite correct to make Narcissus the central figure. So we get a double figure here, Olympia, the robot, taken from the story of E.T.A. Hoffmann, and the figure of Narcissus, who transforms into a flower. So that floral vegetal world is understood by Sternberger really as a transformation after death, not as an end. So the mold is not an end, but it's actually very productive. You know, things actually emerge from that mold. So I think that's quite an interesting opposition between Walter Benjamin and Dolf Sternberger. I'm afraid Sternberger is not translated, and it's really a pity because it's quite beautiful. Dolf Sternberger, here it is. Very sweet little book. Anyway, so that's, and then I push a bit further. Let's do that for just 5 more minutes. So we just push a bit further. Because now we're entering psychedelics, and you know, we're reading Walter Benjamin, and he's taking hashish and starting to talk about the aura, the famous aura, and he calls it an ornament, and he's very clear about how that ornament, how it differs from the theosophist, the theosophisten, right, and their idea of the aura, because it's an ornamentale Umzirkung, it's an ornamental radiation of things. So where we suddenly are is in this psychoactive world, where all the taking of mescaline, hashish, acid, all these are suddenly related to ornamentation. Henri Michaud calls it the visions he gets from taking mescaline, ornamentogenesis. You see the same in Ernst Junger, taking a masculine, talking about ornament. You see the same in Aldous Huxley, who's actually quite smart about like connecting the images of hell to the images of heaven, right? So for him, it's heaven and hell. Again, lots and lots of connections to ornament. The same in Heinrich Klüver, the same in Weir Mitchell. There's a whole range of neurologists and philosophers taking masculine and hashish, relating it to ornament. And then I'm thinking, like, let's sit in an Art Nouveau room, you know, and just have our breakfast and have the wallpaper around us, you know, and this wallpaper is completely kaleidoscopic, or it's completely ornamental, in the sense that, you know, it's not ornament anymore that, you know, at the top of a column, just like a little incident. No, it's a full wall. Just think of William Morris, it's a full wall. Or think of Owen Jones, a fully crystalline wall, you know, and you're eating your breakfast. So how does that work? How does that work? So we got these very extreme experiences, you know, like walking through heaven, you know, almost like Dante, and you're seeing all these sort of kaleidoscopic patterns, and you put them on the wall, and then you're having your breakfast and drinking your tea. And I really think there's something extremely interesting. Why? I think mainly because you don't look at them. Right? I'm not sure if I see a lot of white walls behind you guys. I don't see a lot of wallpaper. Well, I think that's really the mystery here, because we really make the mistake when we visit an Art Nouveau house. We start looking around, and we pick them up maybe. No, it's not allowed. We pick them up and we look at them. We look at all the nymphs, and we look at all the water plants, and we look at all the colors. But when you live there, you sort of don't look at them anymore. And I have behind this book, this wall of books in the other room, we have like William Morris stuff, and it's really like, yeah, you live with it. So that's a completely different, again, this sort of notion of not seeing. I think that's the real question. It's like maybe it's a sort of bodily seeing, what you see with your body when you walk around or walk along. But it's not for the eyes. It's not for the eyes. I think that's one of the clues here. Anyway, so this is my far too long summary of the talk. But there's something of great interest here. It's like about technology extension, then mimesis, taking the position of mimesis, what type of patterns. So what we're going to do is like show you the research of the actors, but you will see that the research is very much connected. They're not like five just separate figures. There's a very central figure, is Lucy, because it's about halos and how you can structure halos. And also on the other side is the two automatons. So one is the soft robot and the hard robot, the Gloria and Olympia figure. And then we'll be looking at the octopus as a figure. One side is on its limbs, the multi-limbed side, and the other side is the multicolored side. So we'll have a lot to say about how these figures are constructed, what type of limbs they have, how they take on images, and how they take on patterns and divide up colors. So we'll be talking a lot about sort of how these figures move, and as well as sort of what kind of image they radiate. So we'll go from Gloria, the soft robot, which will be presented by Hyrie, then to the hard robot of Olympia by Hayden. Then we'll see Lucy appear, Lucy in the sky with diamonds from the Beatles. The psychedelic figure in the middle, and then we go to the octopus via Jussard, talking first about the multi-limbed side of the octopus, and then Sabri talking about the multicolored, the variegation of and the power of the octopus to create patterns and be bioluminescent. So we start with Hyrie on Gloria. So that's
all right. Thank you, Lars. Gloria as a figure, of course, is originated in J.G. Ballard's story as a psychotropic house, but in our Mario board, it's an expansion of automata as a soft robot, and also an extension of the cyborg, which again originated from Donna Haraway's writings. So Gloria somewhere positions between these two of our figures. As a soft robot, Gloria has potential to change its form infinitely and echo its occupants through this form changing. She can lift her ceiling, she can grow her walls, she can change the opacity of her skin, and she can bulge her ceiling. So there's an infinite potential of what she can do with her organs. While Ballard is talking about Gloria, describing Gloria and her transformation, he usually uses organ analogy, and he resembles the form or the movements of Gloria into the workings of the organ. For example, he says, the room was now a gray sphere, 10 feet in diameter. Thick veins as broad as my arm were knotting across its surface, crushing the end boards of the bedspread. As a skin, which is the largest organ of the human body, turns into a plastex, a material which has capacity to move between plasticity from pliancy to rigidity. Whilst changing its form, the plastex turns into a pliant material that can take different forms, and then when that formation stops, the plastex takes a rigid form. So this movement between the pliancy and the rigidity is a strong quality of Gloria, because Gloria can be turned off. You can stop Gloria working, and in that case, Gloria takes a rigid form. So as a soft robot, actually what Gloria represents is a dichotomy to this rigid, non-responsive houses that we are living in. Of course, Ballard's story is taking place in the future, and our houses is just a past for him, and the Gloria, the soft robot, the soft house, the responsive medium is the current situation. Besides being a soft robot, Gloria is a psychotropic house. And what makes Gloria a psychotropic house? One, as Lars mentioned, it's the range of her transformation is endless. Plus, secondly, Gloria echoes its inhabitants. Gloria develops a consciousness or a mimetic relationship, let's say, between herself and her occupants. And in Ballard's story, a psychotropic house, when the owner of the psychotropic house changes, the house's consciousness changes and adjusts itself to this new occupants as well. And the story, Ballard's story starts with this newly married couple moving into a psychotropic house. The couple is Howard and Faye. And when they moved in the house, they are not aware of they don't really have the real knowledge about the previous occupants of the house. So when they first introduced to the house has a weird response or a strange response to Howard and Faye. And Ballard says from the Howard's voice, "As I stepped forward, it suddenly jerked away, almost in alarm. The entrance, retracting and sending a low shudder through the rest of the sphere." So when they start living in Gloria, this psychotropic house, they slowly realize that there is something not quite normal with Gloria. And they believe that they just need some more time for the psychotropic house to adjust her behavior to their behavior. However, this reflection of this mimetic relationship between Gloria and Howard and Faye is more problematic than it's supposed to be. As Lars mentioned, this soft mirror, the soft reflection of their habit doesn't really translate into Gloria's habits and Gloria's behavior. And this behavior reflects at one point that mixes this master and servant relationship, where Howard and Faye supposed to be the master and the Gloria servant, and serve through changing its form to echo their habits. However, this echo is not very straightforward. The relationship between master and servant is somehow blurry and a fuzzy environment for Gloria. And this interaction between the new occupants and the house later on reflects through the violence to the new occupants. So while reflects as a violence, and this violence is actually comes from the memory of the previous occupants. Later on, Howard and Faye learns that the previous owner is a movie star called Gloria and an architect. And one night, through an altercation, Gloria shoots her husband and kills him. So this violent behavior of Gloria remains a strong impact on the psychotropic house. And the Gloria story is actually, Faye and Howard are very much familiar with Gloria's story. They follow the court case, they follow the story. So when they realized that the previous owner is Gloria, they started to create links between Gloria and the psychotropic house's behavior. And of course, within this interaction between the inhabitants and their medium, another surprising thing is the somehow the jealousy or the fetishization developed between Howard and Gloria. So as a result of this relationship, one day Gloria actually attacks Faye and tries to kill her. And while Howard tries to save his wife, Gloria starts reacting to his comments. So again, this relationship between master and servant is broken between Howard and Gloria. Gloria doesn't listen to Howard's comments. But later, as you see in this image, Faye is somehow stuck between the muscles of this heavy plastics of Gloria, and then Howard comes and saves Faye. However, Faye doesn't take it any longer, and Faye leaves Howard towards the end of the story. This idea between the responsive medium and the inhabitant becomes somehow an inspiration for the architects as well, and especially like exploration for the responsive environment. We see several projects referring to architectural projects referring to Ballard's story and this responsive medium. One is the archigram, The other one is the project NSA muscle bypass Osterham, and then the hyperwall with shape-shifting wall responding to the movements of the users. And then another one, of course, the responsive or the interactive environment is Life's H2O, the water pavilion. In all these architecture examples, there's a very strong connection between, again, the human organs, the muscles, the hearts, and their emotions, and what architecture does. For example, in the NSA muscle project, it's described through, I quote, programmable buildings change shape by contracting and relaxing industrial muscle. The muscle programmable building is a pressurized soft volume wrapped in a mesh of tensile muscles, which change length, height, and width by varying the pressure pumped into the muscle. This description of this architecture project is actually has a direct echo in, of course, or a origination in Ballard's story. I quote, "Of course, you are getting nothing but custom-built units here. The vinyl chains in this plastics were handcrafted literally molecule by molecule. I left the room, shift around me. The ceiling was dilating and contracting in steady pulses, an absurdly exaggerated response to our own respiratory rhythms. But the motions were overlaid by sharp transverse spasm, feedback from some cardiac alignment." So this language, the analogy between the organ and the psychotropic house, the organ and the responsive medium, is very much interesting. But what makes the psychotropic house even, or moves the psychotropic house even beyond a responsive environment, is this notion that the echo or the developed consciousness is not exactly a mimetic relationship between the master and the servant, nor it's a completely independent consciousness of the servant either. So there is this fuzzy boundary, and that this fuzzy boundary requires somehow alienation or the self-movement of the soft robot, the soft automaton, but also the alienation of its behavior from the inhabitants' habits. And at the end, when actually in Ballard's story, say, leaves Howard, Howard stays with Gloria and lives with Gloria, and this somehow love relationship or the fetishizing Gloria continues in the story. Howard explains the reasons why he doesn't leave home is blissfully her presence would be everywhere in the house, and Gloria's presence. 1,000 echoes of her distilled into every matrix and sensor cell, each moment of emotion blended into a replica more intimate than anyone, apart from her dead husband, could ever know. The Gloria Tryman, with whom I had become infatuated, had ceased to exist, but this house was the shrine that entombed the very signatures of her soul. I was completely immersed in the exhalation persona of Gloria Tryman, exploring every alcove and niche in search of her. So as a figure of Gloria, the love relationship between us and technology takes a different form into a fetishization, and this fetishization is provided not through a complete mimesis, but through a mimesis, a self-movement, and the alienation. And thank you very much.
Has anybody comments? Anybody wants to comment on this? I see a lot of organs. I see lungs and skin and heart and muscles. It's quite clear that architecture can sort of attempt to, to take on these organs. I'm just wondering, because I think the real power of Ballard's story is that he calls it a psychotropic house. Because that's the whole mystery. He doesn't call it a responsive environment or something. It doesn't call it an Internet of Things or Alexa or whatever. So the real mystery is it's not just that it's responsive, but it actually that the responses create a figure. And that's the psychotropic moment. So there's this transformation through technology the same with like Narcissus becoming a flower. There's a transfiguration that makes this house a Gloria. So Gloria is like a separate inhabitant, or it's like a double house. It's like two houses where you live and where Gloria sort of lives. And where it responds. I'm just wondering, at what point do all these organs and these sort of separate effects become like one apparition of Gloria? You're really interested. It's not something that the architect can control, right?
No, it's not.
But I think that's for the architects. That's quite important to know.
Yes. So actually, there is not a single moment that transfiguration happens in Gloria. That's somehow, as Marzabal commented, that like it's an ongoing presence. So it's developed through the time, and I guess that's what's very interesting in that like responsive or the developing consciousness of Gloria. There is a lag in that time. So Gloria, the psychotropic house, is still living with Gloria and Gloria's memories and Gloria's habits, even though there are new inhabitants in the house itself. This lag is actually causing quite a lot of transfiguration of psychotropic house into Gloria. Mm-hmm. So another issue, of course, we don't know if the house will ever lose the connection with Gloria in the future, right? Mm-hmm. Because actually towards the end of the story, Ballard says that the Howard turned off Gloria, turned off the psychotropic house, and it took a static stage. And within that static stage, Howard starts to live, and he still sees the reflection of Gloria within that static form of psychotropic house. So one speculation is that maybe in the future, the psychotropic house will lose that connection, adapt into more the habit of Howard than the Gloria. But we don't know that. We will never learn about that interaction.
Yeah, that's the idea of the double. I'm also thinking, like, how does this relate to a haunted house, to the idea of a haunted house? I mean, we never talk about a haunted bank or a haunted, it's always about a house. So there must be something about a house that enables it to be haunted. And I think that this idea of domus and domination and domesticity, that is actually this master-servant relationship is so clear in a house that it allows it to reverse and becomes a form of haunting. And somehow this is a version of a haunted house. I also think that this word matrix is really interesting at the end, the final quote you gave, because matrix is actually the same word as a mold, right? So matrice and the matrix are the same. So this is a sort of technological understanding of a mold, but then over time, not just in a single moment, but over time, as it constructs a psychotropic image or a set of images. Yeah, I think that's the word matrix over there. And again, bliss. Yeah. Okay, that's beautiful. Shall we go to Hayden? Because that's quite a different robot.
Yes. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. All right. So here we have Olympia as a figure centered around E.T.A. Hoffman's The Sandman, or the figure from The Sandman. Essentially, Olympia is an automaton constructed, though the protagonist Nathaniel falls in love with her without realizing she's an automaton. And we'll speak about that in a moment, but first I want to explain the structure of Olympia here. Because she is a hard robot, she has a hard structure, and she is on two axes, and these create a triangle form, triangle plot, as I refer to it. So on one axis, on the top, we have a phenomenology and technology spectrum. Phenomenology is centered around appearance, and technology is centered around function. And the second axis is the vertical axis, which is ranging from animal to vegetal. You'll notice that things converge to the center of the axis, or to the center of the plot, as they go further towards vegetal, and that's not because, or that is because things are not necessarily, excuse me, okay, they are converging because as something becomes more vegetal, it is not necessarily favoring phenomenology over technology. You see here the vases from Art Nouveau down towards the bottom, and these fit quite well with Walter Benjamin's, or these are here because Walter Benjamin's characterization of Olympia as the central figure of Art Nouveau, and particularly the German Jugendstil. And so the vase is not apparently a robot, but it is still embodying spirit, and it has its inner workings, if you will, are fully on display, which is in the center of the technology side that I will explain in a moment. But the appearance side is also as apparent as the inner workings, this being the full objective of the vase and its purpose. So moving back into the upper portion of the, trying to zoom in here. Okay. So moving back into the upper portion of the triangle, on the technology side, there's a notion of inhabitation of spirit, and Webster's dictionary defines spirit as an animating or vital principle held to give life to physical organisms, and obviously we can't use this specific definition, but if we tweak it into a less concrete giving life, but more of embodying, it really is a misfitted spirit that is within the automaton itself. And in the Sandman, we have Olympia as a beautiful automaton, and Nathaniel falls in love with her, which Freud uses as, or Freud speaks of Olympia quite often. He talks about the fetishization of a living doll, talking about children don't fear living dolls, they actually desire them. And Olympia is the embodiment of a living doll, which ultimately comes into the form of connection between love and castration. Give me a second.
That's hardcore.
Yeah. And so, moving from the living doll, there's a lot of mention from the Sandman and in general about how Olympia's eyes are perceived throughout the world. A quote from Nathaniel's friend trying to advise him that um, um, sorry, okay, um, trying to advise his friend Nathaniel, who has fallen in love with his automaton, that there's something off about her, and talking about how she seems particularly stiff and soulless, and if her glance were not so utterly without a ray of life, she might be perceived as beautiful. And to this, Nathaniel gets quite upset and talks about how he looks at her and her eyes are beaming with love and desire, and ultimately, because we know there's the saying, the eyes are the window to the soul, and then in the Bible there's the light is the body of the eye, and if thine eye is evil, so shall you be evil. And we realize at the end of the Sandman that Olympia's eyes were not her own eyes. There's a powerful image of Olympia being seen as a waxen and deadly pale countenance with no eyes and black holes instead. She was indeed a lifeless doll. And Olympia's creator explains that to Nathaniel that her eyes were not her own. They were taken from Nathaniel, actually. So really, the eyes were mirroring the love Nathaniel had for her. And of course, in this mirror, we get a double and so we move into really going towards the
Can I ask a question?
yes.
I'm really interested in at what point do we fall in love? Because there is a little bit of a twist in Walter Benjamin.
Mm-hmm.
He seems to first use it critically. So it's like, okay, that's a frigid woman, and not fertile, so she must be a robot. And let's use Olympia from E.T.H. Hoffmann as a metaphor for that. But then there's this issue of love,
Mm-hmm.
and so that it starts to mean, that's and that's almost like what links it to Gloria, is that that Walter Benjamin seems to suggest that the inhabitant of an Art Nouveau house actually falls in love with his own house.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's pretty interesting, So at what point do we fall in love? And that's I see your Narcissus on the left. There's this idea of mimesis, and that at a certain point, that image in the water becomes a lovely image, and then the eyes stare back. The eyes as a window to the soul. So I think that's the certain point. And we raise this issue of the apparition, and of course with Gloria she only appears through her skin, but here it's the eyes, and I think that's in that sense it's a stunning notion of Walter Benjamin to actually say, instead of using it critically, it's actually a great observation. That you can actually sort of wrap the whole idea of Art Nouveau house in this figure of Olympia, because it's a relationship of love and technology.
Yeah. Love and...
I can't hear you. Hear you, Hayden.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Hello? Okay. You can?
No, we can't hear you. Yeah, can we hear you now?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so love and lust come into play quite powerfully in the phenomenology side of this, and there's... Sorry, I've lost my place. Okay, so you mentioned the love of the house of Art Nouveau, and that becomes a love of self with because you start to see the possibilities of yourself within the house, And that ties quite well into the Narcissus falling in love with the reflection. And again, Nathaniel fell in love with the reflection of himself in the eyes of Olympia. And so in Otto Ronk's The Double, it talks about the narcissistic attitude of imposing egoism, and the how sorry, lost my place again.
Yeah.
How the use of a double becomes a way of self-preservation instead of, and self-preservation and self-love, as we move further up into the phenomenological side of this triangle here, we see more instances of creations from people that people then fall in love with. For instance, the Sophia android, which was the first android to gain citizenship of any country. You see here her creator giving her a kiss because of his love for his own creation. And then there's in Mimesis, we have the Pygmalion statue.
Can we zoom out a bit? Can we zoom out and see the Pygmalion? I think that's, yeah, a bit, yeah. Okay, where's the Pygmalion?
It's up in the upper left. I don't know if you can see my cursor.
Yeah, on the left, next to the Blade Runner.
Yeah.
Rachel from Blade Runner.
Mm-hmm. So Pygmalion carved his statue and fell in love with the statue because it represented everything that he believed was virtuous, and he would kiss the statue, believing that it felt more real to him than any living woman. And eventually, the gods grant him the personification, I suppose, the vitalization of this statue, and so it becomes a real woman in as much of a sense as it can. But we see this also in the other images around the Pygmalion. A little below, there are sculptors carving statues of women based on real life, but distinctly different from real life. So we have another instance of the doubling here. Yeah. Okay. And so that really pulls into this idea of man can create an android, or not an android, but a figure here that embodies all that they want, which is another sort of narcissism. And then, for those of you familiar with Blade Runner, and its inspiration, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, the android Rachel Rosen is initially thought by the protagonist to be a woman, like a real woman. And she is later found out to be an android, and he's still attracted to her, even though she is an android, and she intentionally manipulates him, at one point stating before they engage in sexual activity, talking about, I'm not alive, and you are not going to bed with a woman. Don't be disappointed, okay? Have you ever made love to an android before? And so, yeah. So she's using, essentially she is the epitome of an exterior of a woman. Really the only thing that is different about her that is detectable in this sense is her eyes. And again, eyes are the window to the soul. In Blade Runner, the Void-Comp test is something that they use to detect androids, and it's all about detecting motion in the eye.
Mm.
And so there's another quote down here talking about "I love you," and this is being said by the android who is not believed to be capable of love. And if you entered a room with if I entered a room with a sofa covered in your hide, I would score very high on the Voight-Kampff test, meaning that she would have an emotional reaction that would be detectable within her eyes.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. There are no questions. We can move to Lucy.
Thank you.
Go ahead then.
Everybody hear me?
Sure.
All right, so let's start with Lucy. Lucy, just one second. Lucy is Lucy is from Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, right? And the figure of Lucy does not take a human form, but it's made of halos that is pure radiance, right? This transports us to surreal dreamscapes of fulgor, liquidity, and crystallization. Lucy is a structure with a middle zone. If you want to zoom out, maybe. So yeah, it's a middle zone. Where we will see the appearance of halos.
We zoom out a bit. Can we zoom out?
Yeah, thank you. And a crystalline and a liquid side that it's hard and soft side. So let's start with a quote with Adolf Huxley from Heaven and Hell. He says, the soul is transported to its far-off destination by the aid of chemical, either mescaline or lysergic acid, taking its passengers further into the terra incognita. So we confront, right? We're seeing here the biggest halo of our figure, which is the visions of Purgatory and Paradise by Dante Alighieri and the drawings of Gustave Doré. The first drawing called the Saintly Throne in the shape of a rose. We see Dante and Beatrice gaze upon the highest heaven, and below is the halo of Beatrice visiting Virgil in limbo, and then the halo of the celestial messengers dispersing in the devils, right? So we are starting with halos, with the transcendence of the body, the radiance and glowing, and we see Gustave Moreau in his paintings described it very well, right? We see Jacob and the Angel, a painting from 1878, showing a bright gold halo, and most impressive in the apparition, right? Where we see the floating head of John the Baptist, right? With even his hair and beard with clots of blood, right? So this is our first apparition, and then we also, if you scroll down, we see the paintings of Fra Angelico, which he was known as the master of.
You scroll down. Who is manipulating the image?
Yeah, thank you, Harry. Those two are the details of Fra Angelico paintings, right? The first one is the detail of the Christ child from a fresco in Florence, where we see the dazzle of we dazzled, right, by the radiant disc surrounding the head of the Holy Child, and then the detail of the Archangel Gabriel in the painting of the Annunciation, where the light of his halo shines, and basically, I mean, if we see the whole painting is full of gold, right? I mean, it's like a prelude of the light that will come in 9 months after, right? Will illuminate the whole humanity, right? So Aldous Huxley in Heaven and Hell also quotes. I want to quote him in his says, always and everywhere made use of this, religious art as always and everywhere made use of these visions inducing materials, the shrine of gold. Yeah, you can scroll down to the next two paintings, which are the portraits of King Henry II. Scroll down, Harry. And then the portrait of Queen Victoria in her crown, right? And crowns were used to indicate beings who were believed to be ordained by the gods. The crown for a king and a queen shows power, right? And immortality, victory, triumph, resurrection, honor, glory, afterlife. So we are seeing here, I'm talking about the notion of transcendence. And before the crowns, we had the tiaras, right? So same concept. We see the tiara of this enclosed mummy from the Roman Egyptian area, and then Julius Caesar statue with who he was known to wear these laurel wreaths, right? Paul Virilio writes in the Aesthetics of Disappearance, the false glitter, the aura, the refulgence precedes the loss of consciousness and attacks the spectator's will. Light of the great void of nimbus encircling the visage of the fight emperor, and also that of Christ and the saints. Helmets studded with hems, tiaras, diadems. The insignia of power are also efficacious prostheses of royal nirvana that transform the assistance of the state into manipulation of subjects by the price. So moving down, we come to the horns of Moses, and the holy writer described Moses' face as shining when he descended from the mountain. However, when translated to Latin, there was a change in words. So it says that the skin of Moses' face was shining, radiant, or shining forth. Comes from the Hebrew word karan. In his Latin translation, Jerome used the word cornuta, which means horn. So the Latin was translated as horns were coming forth from Moses' head. And also, if you scroll down, we come to the last two halos here. First we have the Native American shaman wearing a headpiece with deer horns, right? That is part of a mimetic dance to appease the deer spirit. And then at the bottom, we have this same notion of greatness of America, right? The corona radiata, or the radiant crown, known best of this Statue of Liberty. So the aura, the halo, the crowns, all these, they all shine a radial pattern, and we can link this to ornament, the whiteness. All these auras look back to you. They come from the inside out into a soft, hard dream world, and we get color. So you can go up at Heidi, and we get color hard and soft. So going back to radiance on the left side, maybe you want to click on the video. We have the liquid state, the soft in psychotropics, a connection of liquidity and light. The notion of floating, and we start to see visions of colors. I'm quoting here She's a Rainbow by the Rolling Stone, which is regarded nowadays as a psychedelic classic. The track is Technicolor Dream. Some of its lyrics say, "She comes in colors everywhere. She's like a rainbow. Have you seen her all in gold?" I will sing to you guys, but better not, right? So we have this psychedelic, right? Basically, it means to awaken the mind, and it pertains to hallucinations, distortions, the perception of awareness, right? And we get confronted to this all these psychedelic light shows that were that born on the art events and concerts in the 60s, right? Giving this trippy atmosphere. We see that's a small gif about how it's done. So basically, it's just a projector and glass where it's dumped with color and oils, and then it can be projected right to the musicians or the art performers, so they get all not only doing their art, like we see an image of Syd Barrett from Pink Floyd, right? And where he's full of liquidity, right? At the same time that he's playing the guitar. So we have these connections of things radiating, glowing, being bright under the influence, and seeing visions and patterns. If we go to if you can scroll to the right, Harry, just to show the crystalline hard side versus this soft, right? And in here you can put if you scroll up, you can put the video, and I want to just quote a little bit the song of the Beatles, the "Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds," where it says, I mean, everybody knows this song, right? A girl with kaleidoscope eyes, and then also cellophane flowers of yellow and green. Look for the girl with her sun in her eyes. So these kaleidoscope visions, right? We guess it gets it's this kaleidoscope vision is a symptom of migraine, right? And literally it means also observer of beautiful things. The kaleidoscope, of course, it's this instrument, right, that works with these reflecting surfaces or mirrors, and tilted in an angle, right? And at the end, we got these color pieces of glass that, by the help of rotation, we get all these patterns, right? So in here, we encounter not only the multicolors, but also colors in action, colors moving in rotation, right? And this change of colors, kaleidoscopic projections, send us to another world of visions and patterns, like the Huichol art, which is vibrancy of the vibrancy of colors, right? We see these images of patterns, almost like a colorful, vibrant doodling, right? And I just want to quote here, or a section or a part of Carlos Castañeda book, where he recounts his encounters with, yeah, you can stay there, thanks, with Don Juan Matus, right, a Yaqui Indian from northern Mexico. Don Juan and I walked back collecting peyote buttons. This was the first time I had tasted a fresh button. I chewed 14 buttons. At the moment, I felt great surge of wisdom engulfing me. I sang feverishly until I could no longer voice the words. I felt as my songs were inside my body, shaking me uncontrollably. I walked towards the peyote fields. Their echo produced the indescribable euphoria of being a man. Each one of the peyote plants on the field shone with a blush, scintillating light. One plant had a very bright light. Something emerged from a strange star-like light. It was a long, shiny object. For a moment, it illuminated the whole field with an intense yellowish or amber light. Then it lit up the whole sky above, creating a portentous, marvelous sight. I thought I would go blind if I kept on looking. Everything was alive. Everything had exquisite and intricate detail. This particular feeling lasted long enough for me to become aware of it. Then it changed into oppressive terror. Gradually, I lost the feeling of floating in a world undifferentiated, indifferent, and beautiful. I was floating. I was as if I had fallen asleep and was dreaming. And in that dream, I saw a series of disconnected images. We were no longer in the darkness of the room. There was so much light that it blinded me. So these are, I mean, there are many, I can quote a lot, but we basically, we have the colorful of this visual art, right? And we see it in objects. We have this Volkswagen Beetle on the side, and on the other side, on the on the left, it's the psychedelic, trippy Volkswagen bus, right? Which is morphologically transformed, mutated from the inside out by this psychedelia, right? And let's stay on the right side here, and we can go from this, so we can see this type of objects compared to the whole cosmos. You can scroll to the right. So we want to go to the mandalas.
The board.
To the hi, we can, yeah, thanks. So we come from this. Yeah, scroll to the right, to the mandalas, to the other side. No, the other side. Thank you, Henry. There you go. Perfect. So we are in this. We were looking to these objects, right? And we go from objects to the whole cosmos. These multicolor structures, right? The mandalas, which it's a state of meditation or a trance induction, right? We have three images here. Is the one on the far right is a mandala of Vishnu, and the one in the middle is the Tibetan Buddhist monk's sand mandala, and then the last one is the Aztec sandstone, right, which is also a mandala. Let's if we go to the fireworks. So fireworks were thought to be imitations of celestial phenomena, right? The audiences were astonished and they made a powerful impression. This the one on the far right is a painting by Jacob Philip Hackers, which painted the fireworks over the castle at San Angelo in Rome in 1775. And somebody described that moment as a radiant explosion. And it mentions something like, night falls, a crowd assembles, a kaleidoscope of exploding colors and noise entertained us to the sound of oohs, ahs. All around the world throughout the year, fireworks dazzles up. Pyrotechnic performers create a wide assortment of patterns in the sky, in the dark sky. From starbursts to smiley faces, fireworks mostly seem to be a matter of beauty and awe. So adults mostly quotes in heaven and hell. Thanks to glass, a whole building, the Sainte-Chapelle, for example, the cathedrals of Chartres and Sens, could be turned into something magical and transporting thanks to glass. So we have these images below the fireworks. These rose windows filled with light, colors, crystallized patterns in rotation by these shimmering rays of lights, right? Which brings us to the Islamic geometric art from the tile patterns of Jiri, right? These geometric patterns on the, are made of regular lines and repeated shapes that are often reflected and rotated to create these repeating patterns. Plant-like patterns are common theme in the tile work and feature curving lines, flowers, and leaf motifs, as very close to the wallpapers of William Morris, for example. And Adolf Huxley quotes the pattern, quoting Adolf Huxley, sorry, on his book Heaven and Hell, the pattern of the late Victorian wallpaper, the Art Nouveau Virilio, the Brussels carpet, is seen and rendered as a living jewel. So we find ourselves here in a world of transfiguration, a flower that grows from incandescent becomes this set of images. So let's go back to the liquid side, Harry, and the sense of waves and being underwater. Yeah, you can stay there at John Tour of Art. Yeah, it has been said that the modern, the every age, unavoidably seems to itself a new age. The modern, however, is varied in its meaning as the different aspect of one and the same kaleidoscope. And quoting, I'm going to quote Walter Benjamin, Arcade's project, painting Jugendstil and novelty. In a prefiguration of Jugendstil Baudelaire sketches, a room that is like a dream, a truly spiritual room, every piece of furniture is of an elongated form, languid and prostrate, and seems to be dreaming, endowed, one would say, with somnambular existence, like minerals and plants. So like John Turup's art, right? We have here O'Grady, Fatality, and a poster, right? And this links us to the psychedelic art that began with these surreal, visual, vibrant colors, swirling color patterns of LSD hallucinations, and inspired mainly by Art Nouveau. We have this modified with the more vibrant and intense colors, these posters, right? To evoke the visual experience of an LSD tripper. So these psychedelic posters from the 60s. So the effect of psychedelic is this, the vibration is achieved by taking colors from the opposite end of the color wheel, each having an equal value, dark to light, and intensity and brightness. And these visual motifs of psychedelic art, with its curvilinear shapes, illegible hand-drawn type, and intensity, forms melting and projection of new images, relates to André Breton's automatism, for example, right? The automatism, or in automatic drawing, the hand is allowed to move randomly across the paper in applying chance and accident to mark making. Drawing is too large and extend free or rational control, right? And so automatism produced this artwork without thought or will or intervention from the conscious mind. And we have these three images. The one on the far left is a drawing by André Masson in 1925. The one in the middle is a drawing by Salvador Dalí, an automatic drawing, and the one on the right is the automatic drawing by Oscar Dominguez, who created this decalcomania that was used a lot for these automatic drawings and surrealist. There is a passage from Adolf Huxley in Heaven and Hell, which I was going to quote, but I think Lars also put it in the video, and basically it talks about this visionary world transported by peyote, but I think I'm going to skip it and go straight to this mescaline psychiatric and psychedelic art from the 1930s, which this 1936, two doctors from a psychiatric hospital did these experiments with encouraging patients suffering from schizophrenia to make art, and also some of the surrealist painters or artists got involved. So they produced this art. The first one is Julian Trevelyan, Kaizen Shapes is called. And then we see this kaleidoscope cat. And these three are made with people induced with mescaline, right? And then we have 3 images on the bottom, which are done with artists induced by LSD. And for example, the one on the far right is 9 drawings. The experiment designed to investigate the psychedelia drug effect, and the artist was given 50 microgram of dose of LSD every 65 minutes, and you can see the changing of the the art, right? And so all these shimmering halos and psychotropically induced visions, how closely they come to these patterns of kaleidoscope and liquid light projection. And it's all about radiance itself, right? It's about vibrancy of color as well. I think that's it. Yes.
Why do we have a liquid side and a crystalline side?
The liquid side is the soft side. So I try to travel or to take you guys from this whiteness or this inner radiance of the halo, which is pure white and transform into gold, and it's an inner radiance, and then it transformed to this liquid state or soft state on the left, and then on the right is this crystalline hard side, which is we go from whiteness to color, but one side of the color is liquid and one side of the color is hard.
Okay, so we have white or gold in the middle, which is a sort of a set of typologies, almost of radiance, of like the crown and the antlers and the Imperium of Dante and the mandorla. So we get like different types of radiance, generally coming from the head. And then we get, almost like we get an application of radiance on the left and right. It's very, very rich. It's almost like a book, you could make a book out of this. But the real question is, why does that? It's clear that radiance splits into color, breaks into color when it wants to be applied. Applied either to a Volkswagen or to a wall, or like a kaleidoscope or paintings or whatever. So there's a transformation going on. So the white light or the gold light sort of breaks, almost like a prism, and it sort of casts its colors over objects, and then they start to like shine. But the real question is, why do we have a liquid side and a crystalline side? It must have to do with the type of transformation, and it's also has to do with how it deals with form and pattern. I'd say that it's almost like you get a pattern side and an image side. Mm-hmm. This is classic abstract art problem. So you get like towards the abstract and the concrete, where you start to describe contour an object, and when the abstract sort of moves away from that contour, and you can see on the right that the contour is doubled or multiplied, becomes vibrant, starts to shake. That's almost like you're moving from the image towards the pattern. and the other one is from the pattern to the image or something. I'm wondering why we got these two states, why there's not just one state. I mean, we get a Volkswagen. It's very interesting to see a Volkswagen in two states. There's like a flower power liquid side and a Mexican very crystalline. Can we just zoom in on those two Volkswagen? I think that's quite a stunning, because that Volkswagen on the left is like it's a hybrid, and it's completely, so it's completely transformed, while on the right you got this multiplication of contours. It's quite an opposition, it's quite an opposition where the one on the right tries to sort of put the diagram of the form by vibrancy of the contours of the elements, and while on the right you completely lose the elements and they actually start to hybridize and intermingle. I mean, the transcendence almost means you're doubling the contour of something. You get a first body and a second body. You see it in the Gustave Moreau. You see that body, the painting of the body, and then there's this radiant extra contour, right? You see the same with the mandala and all these apparitions. You'll get the double image. You get a double image. It's almost like it's magical realism. You get both the realism and the magic. Right. I remember there's in Mexico, there's actually another type of magical realism. I think it's called Real Mavioso or something. It's a
Remedios Varo, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a marvelous realism. I
Yes.
think that's a very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're still discussing realism here, and it's somehow it's like interspersed with colors. And it's as if the colors move toward the image or the colors move out of the image, right? Because we've been discussing mimesis and liquidity with the two figures, the Gloria and Olympia, and I'm thinking like, okay, one moves toward the image and the other moves away from the image. I'm not sure, Marie-Isabelle, you should be the expert on liquid and crystals. There's like. If there is a materiality of light here, let's put it like that. It's not just about matter and then depicting it, but it's the light itself that becomes material.
Well, that's essentially kind of where I wanted to lead to with my comment in the chat, because it's interesting how, Christo, you structured this with the halo in the middle, and if you're thinking of, sort of that transition, the transmutation from liquid to crystalline, you think of a progressive structuring, and yet in the middle you have this almost very atmospheric, the light component, the atmosphere that's almost beyond the substance that is being kind of changed. And so I find that very interesting how you've kind of inserted that in the middle. Did you have further thoughts on that? I know that was a question. And the structuring of your diagram.
Well, actually, in the structure, it was interesting because at the beginning, I was thinking of I actually did one first diagram, which was a circle, because at the beginning, I thought that basically to create this landscape, like you say, or this atmospheric, but not to put it kind of in a frame, and all images will coincidentally meet. But it was just too hard to read. It was not working. And actually, Lars suggested something more like this. But it's mainly the same concept. We have like you said, the atmospheric. Or the dreamy landscape, the surreal, this glowing atmospheres in the middle, and then it doesn't split, but it surrounded by this color, which kind of was also in the idea of the circle, right? But here is like you can see it more clear. I mean.
I think it's. I like the sort of also what Laura's comment on how on one side So yeah, you have to. We're constantly kind of probably having to fight our reaction of saying either or. That it's one side, not the other, and that's kind of the way I would read this if I weren't already understanding what you were trying to say. But I do like. So one thing I do like. So there's a couple of different ways we could look at this. Is it the liquid that transitions into atmospheric that then allows for a restructuring? Or a structuring or a patterning. So I don't know, how we could possibly look at this in a couple of different ways, the diagram and the content. I really think the liquid, the image versus the pattern is an interesting sort of contrast that Lars mentioned to make and to think about a little bit further, and how that how the right side is a kind of the crystalline side is it's almost a further structuring into kind of almost a transfiguring moment of detail where it's so exquisite it's almost painful, the patterns that are on the right hand side. But anyway, I just these are just comments that I had while you were, or thoughts that I had while you were presenting this wonderful presentation. Yep.
I think it's very clear if you think about the two contours. Basically, in the middle, you accept all things have two contours, right? So you say there's a bodily contour and there's the radiance. So all things transcend. So and that means it's a double contour. And then you say, okay, that means that you can look at it from two directions. One is from that second contour inward. That's a defining of substance, which makes it move towards the contour, which is crystalline and mineral. And the other is sort of moving away from it, and that's a liquefying. You see, the guitarist is just dissolving, it's just going away. So that's, and I think it's that. It's actually saying, look, in the middle we have the double contour, and then on the right side we move from the second to the first, and on the left from the first to the second. So the first one, the left one is dissolving, while the other one is sort of crystallizing or becoming object.
Yeah.
It's all a relationship between things and medium.
I
think it's fantastic. You have a complete atlas here of how the notion of radiance is applied to things.
The cosmos.
Yeah, I think you could look at like
cosmology.
Well, you could look at like jewelry. You could look at, or like how boxes are laid in by jewels or gems. You could look at paintings of halos. Just think of Titian and Fra Angelico and all those, Tintorettos. There's like a whole morphology of halos. And then on the left side, you get sort of this liquid application. And on the right side, you get the crystalline application. There's a whole aesthetic that crosses right through dozens of cultures. It's quite stunning, I think Aldous Huxley would love it, You get a proper layout and understanding of, I think it's quite correct to have a left and a right. And you could look at wallpapers too. There's you can just see that, the crystalline ones that only have heart like patterns, hexagonals or whatever. Then you have the softer ones, anything in between. A mixture of colors, contrast, gradual. This is like how the colors are beset, around the contours.
One thing I didn't mention, but I found a lot of images. It was too much, but I found it really interesting how the kaleidoscope images, they are flat, but they are not flat. Of course, they give us these 3 dimensions, right? And then on the Arabic the Jiri tile, there are some mosques that the tiling starts to have dimension, like especially in the ceiling. It's not flat; it's actually. So it really glues these 2 images of the kaleidoscope object or these projections with the actual building, right? With this dome, which starts to would the tiling start to have like a terrain, like almost like a terrain above you, right, or on the sides?
Mm-hmm.
But there are a lot of images about this idea.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, let's go to the octopus. Could you guys say something about why you have two diagrams? I think that's quite important, because this is the first one where we get that sort of that one figure splits in two. Dujar, Sabri?
We are actually investigating octopus, this figure octopus side of limbs, like it's a multi-limbed organism, and we are also investigating it from more of a consciousness side, from polychromy and color as well. So that's why we wanted to focus on these two aspects and divide the figure into two complementary halves. So I think Juzar is going to start first, then I'll pick up.
Cool.
Yeah. Thank you, Sabri. Can we begin at the center? Can zoom in. Zoom out a bit. So I can talk about the structure first, and then we go into the details of it. Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's it. Okay. We'll start with the structure of the gap first, the gap itself. Earlier, with other figures, I was talking about the hand space and the foot space and the gap, which is in the space itself. But over here, in the figure of the octopus, it seems that the hand space itself is being split into two spaces. The one going into the direction of pointing and grasping, while the other goes into the direction of appearance and illusion. And from this gap, there begins to secrete images where actually the figure transfigures into the world of exchange with, as it comes into the relation with humans, basically. So the vertical axis is about transfiguration. It's about how the figure appears in the human world. And the horizontal axis is about actually what the figure does, and how the two spaces of pointing and grasping on one hand and appearance and illusion on the other turns into attributes of might of hand on one side and sleight of hand on the other side. Sleight of hand basically deals with appearances and illusions, and the might is actually about grasping and pointing of things. Okay, we can begin at the center. Yeah, that's the first appearance of the figure, and how we'll come to it later, but it's a Minoan amphora, and earlier I suppose the octopus was also put inside while one goes octopusing things, like one goes to fishing, so one takes it from the sea and then puts it into the, and how in time it emerges. Okay, so I will go into the right side first. If you can go and just freeze it over there. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Okay. Okay, Estemengol says life began when lines began to emerge and escape the monopoly of blobs. When the figure actually begins to have tentacles and almost like prosthetics, and extends out into the world. Yeah, we can see the first video. It's about how octopus carries a shell with it, a coconut shell. How it grasps one and how it actually exploits this relation between the prey and the predator.
Oh my God.
And you find a lot of this. It's a very normal thing for them. In absence of any surfaces or any crevices or anything to hide, they actually use this as the prosthetic tool.
Oh man.
It takes it wherever it goes. So it's quite an effort, actually, quite a task. Now it is preying on something, and then it brings it back to the shell. It has caught a fish. Okay. Okay, can you zoom out a bit? Yeah. But as Detian points out, the octopus is not simply Just hold on to it. Okay. But the octopus is not simply characteristic of a particular type of human behavior. It is also the model for a form of intelligence. The polyplocon noemia, intelligence with many coils. This octopus-like intelligence is to be found in two types of men in particular, the sophist and the politician. Further exploring the grasping and the pointing dimensions of it, we have two videos where an octopus is opening a jar. There's a fish being put into a jar and sealed at both the sides, and the octopus opens it from one end.
Uh-huh.
And how it uses its limbs, the hands, basically hands. They're not. Okay, and the below one is of a similar kindness, where the tentacles are also meant to feel and touch and taste. All the senses are actually in its limbs or in its hands, which gives it a certain might also. This capability of holding things or grasping things tightly. Okay, we can skip that. Yeah.
Oh my God, where are we? Oh.
Okay, on the right, and zoom in a bit, and read. Yeah, you can zoom in on the right, the might of hand part. Unlike a lizard's regenerated tail, which is invariably of a poor quality than the original, the regrown arm of an octopus is as good as new, complete with nerves, muscles, chromatophores, and perfect virgin circles. Even in the specialized arm of the male, the lingula can be regrown, though this reportedly takes a while longer. And octopuses who have been experimentally blinded navigate flawlessly using their senses of touch and taste, which also means that the octopus is not per se seeing things, but actually feeling its way through. And earlier, it's actually a 500 million old creature, and even before there was oxygen per se, and these were the first creatures to have grown limbs, basically. purely hand space, because there is no ground per se. There is no foot space here actually. It's a floating medium. If you can go towards the left from the center. And over here on the left, we explore more the appearance and the Metis part, how the octopus transforms itself into different appearances. There is a mimic octopus, recently discovered, must have existed, but it's only recently that we have been able to identify it as a mimic octopus. Yeah, Heidi, if you can run the video. Octopus taking on different forms. Yeah, over here it becomes a water snake. There's something else. Something else.
Something else.
It depends. Yeah. Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, as Datian says, the polyplucos octopus is a knot composed of 1,000 interweaving arms. Every part of its body is a bond which can secure anything, but which nothing can seize. Which also talks about the gap and the trap, the medium itself, which the octopus can hide inside the gap and also become a trap in itself, in order to catch its prey. And on the top, you find different variations on the figure. The mimic octopus can take, as far as we know, it can take on 15 different forms of other creatures, as maybe more. This is what we have been able to identify. Before our eyes, Keely's octopus becomes a silken scarf, a beaten heart, a gliding snail, a rock covered with algae, and then it pours itself into a hole. It pours itself into the hole, like water down a drain, and disappears entirely. The essential features of Metis, revealed by our analysis, pliability and polymorphism, duplicity and equivocality, inversion and reversal, imply certain qualities which are also attributed to the curve, to what is pliable and twisted. The ultimate expression of these qualities is the circle, neither beginning nor end, nor front or rear, and which in rotation becomes both mobile and immobile. So from there we move to the grab and the trap, the medium itself, and how the octopus and the figure actually play with it. The elusive octopus is a being of night. The night is their lair. They take shelter in it to escape from their enemies and emerge unexpectedly from it to catch the victim. There are two images. There is actually the octopus, but we can hardly differentiate between the rest. And the octopus is renowned for its Metis. Oppian compares it to a burglar who emerges under cover of night to catch his prey by surprise. The octopus is elusive. Its machinae enables it to merge with the stone to which it clings. Its machinae, we are still actually part of the technical life of the octopus. So even appearance and illusion are part of its technical life, how it lives and how it does things. The sea is like a world full of snares, inhabited as it is by ambiguous creatures whose harmless appearance belies their true deadly nature. Our rocks look like a greyish mass, unalarming and still, but all the time it is an octopus. So from there, from the gap and the trap, we move towards the sleight of hand itself, and actually what the hand is capable of. So I was also looking into shadowgraphy and what sort of actually appearances the hand can make. So I call it an octopusic hand. like you can say octopus as a hand cut loose or our hand as octopusic. So it is not necessarily the rule that the bigger creatures eat the smaller. Those which have not been allotted strength by some god and which are not equipped with some poisonous sting to defend themselves have as their weapons the resources of an intelligence fertile in cunning tricks and stratagems. So this is actually about appearances, and below is a famous show in a play as if where there is an illusion of the ghost, and in the play where an actor is actually conversing with the ghost, and how the ghost is actually being illusioned from a light and how it. In the sense, maybe the octopus is actually mimicking, receiving the creatures and other things as a mold, and then actually it's still in the realm of appearance. It's just the figures, the outlines of the form. It also has at its disposal the squid ink, which they spurt out, and that ink is also a way to camouflage itself or shy away the predators. The squid ink might trick predators into thinking they had caught the squid and are eating it. So it's also a sort of a psychotropic drug sort of a thing also, as it actually induces certain things in the consciousness of the predator itself.
Mm-hmm.
And from this figuration of limbs, we go into the transfiguration of the limbs on the vertical axis from the center, where it actually goes into the exchange, where on one hand the limbs transfigure into the limbs of pleasure at the top, and at the bottom the limbs transfigure into the limbs of pleasure. One can also say that the sleight of hand is actually transfiguring into the limbs of pleasure. There is the sleight of hand, which is always a part of pleasurable experience. So on the top, there is a famous
drawing.
Yeah, drawing by Hakushai, The Dream of the Fisherman's Wife. It's a collection, a 3-volume collection on shunga art, basically erotic art of Japan.
Can we zoom in there?
Yeah, you can zoom in. Its world is not doubtful but surprising. Human reason, this is what Flusser has to say in Vampyroteuthis Infernalis. Its world is not doubtful but surprising. Human reason, which slices and dissects, corresponds in the Vampyroteuthis to coitus and orgasm, which comprehend. Coitus and orgasm, which comprehend. Its concepts are generated by orgasms, and its philosophy is synonymous with copulation. And from there on, if you scroll down, scroll down, you have an Art Nouveau bronze octopus and mermaid inkwell. In case of Vampyroteuthis, the sexual organs are partially located on its tentacles and like its eyes, they're directly connected to its brain. The latter thus receives optic, tactile, and sexual impressions as already coordinated and unified bits of information. All incoming bits of information have simultaneously a tentacular, optic, and sexual dimension. Below this is jewelry designs by Bella Krieger, another Art Nouveau thing, and how actually the arms goes into making of ornaments, and how still a part of the limbs of pleasure, because it gives that. And below that image is another one by Hakushai. It's if you can scroll down, the origin of octopus with potatoes, because octopus are eaten, so octopus and potatoes actually go together. There is another one that Hakushai has done. Farmers in a potato field, and suddenly an octopus emerges from the potato field and scares the farmers. So it's still a part of pleasure, the figure or the octopus being eaten, and then below it is another ancient Greek coin, 4th to 5th century, maybe Minoan, but it still figures an octopus over there. It's purely a figure of exchange now. Actually, economic exchange happens with this figure. And okay,
This seems to be about how the octopus relates to other things or grabs other things, or living things, not objects. It's a very sensuous arm, because the grabbing of the arm and the grabbing of the woman, the grabbing of the vase, they all seem to be, very sensuous.
Very soft, very sensuous, and actually quite caressing. Actually, the word is caress. Okay, we'll come to this Minoan vase later. We'll
What the hell?
go into the other arm, the vertical arm, the bottom arm, which
not
is
too deep. No.
no. We'll skip the Minoan part, and then we'll begin from here. It's about it's actually from the novel of Victor Hugo, the story "The Toilers of the Sea," where the earlier image, the top image, and the bottom one, the hero Gilead, actually has gone into the sea to fight the octopus, and for love, basically. And he doesn't find the octopus. All at once, he felt himself seized by the arm. What he felt at that moment was indescribable terror. He doesn't know that it's an octopus. Only lately he realizes, he recognizes that it's an octopus, the devilfish, as it was known. And Victor Hugo says, to believe in the octopus, one must have seen it. Compared with it, the hydras of the old are laughable. All ideals being admitted, if terror be an object, the octopus is a masterpiece. If terror be an object, the octopus is a masterpiece. From there, we go towards the bottom, the heptapods, another variation of the cephalopods from the film Arrival, where it also talks about the two parts of the language. One is about pointing and grasping, but the other is also about appearance and illusion. Language deals with both. So on the left, you see the writings which the film has conceived in the film itself as circular sentences, with neither beginning nor end. And the arm actually spurts ink, and it appears as a sentence. And on the right, you have the oud. The ouds are an alien species. It's another sci-fi. It's from another sci-fi movie, Doctor Who. The oud are humanoids in appearance with tentacles on the lower portions of their faces. The oud are a telepathic race. As such, they require a translation sphere to communicate with non-telepathic creatures. This is how still part of how octopus is still in exchange with other things, and how it transforms into actually human octopus hybrid forms. And below, another part of a Roman mosaic from Pompeii, where you have an octopus which is running with a lobster and a moray eel following it. So another arm of terror, actually, the arm of might transfiguring into this limbs of terror, which actually can, in the Kraken myth of Norway, Norwegian coasts, the legendary sea monster of an enormous size appears, and actually it is like a storm. The storm and the might of the limbs, the might of terror, or the terror of limbs are all one and the same thing. As a mollusk, as another Flusser says about this might and terror, as a mollusk, the Vampyroteuthis is a slow and passive organism, but at some unknown moment, it became a highly mobile predator. That must have been the moment in which the inner tension of its Dasein exploded into a subject-object. As the Vampyroteuthis became more and more volatile, demonic even, its molluscal passivity was not converted into action, but rather into passion. The objective world did not become for it a sphere of activity, but one of experience. And when it projects itself beyond the world in pursuit of its transcendent self, it does not encounter an active God as we do, but a passionate devil. That's what. And below it is another image of Lovecraft's Tuluv. Tuluv is a fictional cosmic entity created by the writer H.P. Lovecraft. Above these apparent hieroglyphics was a figure of evidently pictorial intent. He was studying some ancient things. If I say that my somewhat extravagant imagination yielded simultaneous pictures of an octopus, a dragon, and a human caricature, I shall not be unfaithful to the spirit of the thing. A pulpy, tentacled head surmounted a grotesque and scaly body with rudimentary wings. And on the side of the Flusser, it also talks about the seabed and how the sea is like. Seawater is largely impervious to cosmic rays that bombard the Earth. Nearly all such rays are absorbed by the water surface itself. The great bodies of water are immersed in eternal night. This eternal night, however, is incredibly noisy. The eternal night reverberates with an incessant noise that would be deafening to us. We are simply seeing the visuals, but actually there is a lot of noise, which again corresponds to the manicoiled medium. Okay, so we can go to the center of it, where actually to the Minoan pot itself, and how this transfiguration and figuration actually both happen in the formation of the pot itself. Earlier, the octopus was inside the pot, and again the pot is made by hands. The sleight of hand gives the shape to the pot. And again, the octopus is involved. The octopus's hand is involved. The octopus as a figure, as transfiguration is involved. Octopus is also involved in the imagination of the maker. So I think in the pot and the different shapes and sizes of amphoras and pots you find, they all have this character to it.
Can we zoom out?
Yeah, Harry, if you can go, if you can zoom out a bit. Yeah.
I'm totally stunned by this structure. Because it looks at first like a fourfold, but it's not. It's a cross, and every time you add something, that the arms get stronger and stronger. It's not that you have it like an empty axis and then put stuff in between. It's like it always remains on the axis, but it's a thickening of the axis. But you do suggest that the sleight of hand is connected to pleasure. And the might of hand is connected to.
So, in the sense, the whole axis transfigures into a vertical axis, and actually the axis rotates. So, if you see it as a rotation thing, because it's night, it doesn't have a rear and a front. So, in that case, we also get an amphora. So, amphora is actually the rounded.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that. I'm thinking of Cthulhu. Cthulhu never properly grabs anything. Of course, the Kraken does. The Kraken grabs ships, and so there's a grabbing there. But it seems that Cthulhu is much more an image, and also with the ink, it can be terror, but it can also be a shadow that's produced by the hand. So I'm still not. And of course, the hand of the heptapod is connected to language. So that's clearly a link to the might, what you call the might of hand of pointing. But it's a very interesting structure. I've never seen it, and there must be many more images that fit on it. It somehow deals all with the incredible softness of the body, and that softness is not indeterminate as a shape. Somehow, because it's tentacled. Because you would think, Ingold talks about the blob and the line, but this is both, because it's not a blob. You'd think like the blob is a purely liquid, but the lines are directional, and it's a lined creature, but it behaves as a blob. But it never turns into a blob. it's quite stunning, you know. It is that you see that it goes towards the hand that grasps and it defines an object, you know, and actually you know, grasps around it, but then it can also with its tentacles actually create the image of other objects, of other fish. It's just an incredible range of flexibility and plasticity. I'm just thinking, like, what would it feel itself, you know, because those feelings that on the vertical axis are our feelings, from all the way from pleasure. So how it deals with other objects, you know, it's either by appearing or by grasping. I would just think, like, does it have any feelings itself? Because it seems to have such an incredible range. It's almost like there's no octopus left, you know. It's almost like
I think it must have some feeling, because on the vertical axis, because it's an axis of exchange also. So the octopus is as much part of the human consciousness as it's actually a shared consciousness. So I think there's something.
Okay, so
Yeah.
when there's pleasure, it gives pleasure, and it receives pleasure.
Mm.
And when there's horror, it gives horror and it receives horror.
Mm.
So there's an exchange. I think that's very interesting. Yeah, I think you definitively have something there. So it takes on the shape of others by feeling, or else it cannot organize its. I mean, it's quite stunning to see those 8 arms close into a single contour and then mimic a fish, the contour of another fish, or like putting 4 on one side and the other 4 on the other side to actually form a snake. It's like, what kind of mimesis is that? What kind of mimesis is that? I'm just thinking, because I mean, if we think of actors, you know, becoming another character, it takes them weeks and weeks. They have to put on the shoes and the costume and the glasses, you know, and to actually become, you know, whatever figure in the play, you know, and this is an immediate response.
It's spontaneous. It's too spontaneous for an actor. It's, I think, I don't know whether it's part of it or it acquires this thing as its growth, but it's incredible how it actually mimics and.
So how can it? I mean, also like taking the cap off a bottle or something. That's such a dexterous move. You have to hold the bottle as well as the cap and then turn in the right direction. There's a incredible intelligence, not just on the right side, but on the left side as well. I'm just thinking, like, what is it? Is it a brain with tentacles, or is it a tentacled brain, or it's just just on the level of consciousness and body, or the body-mind split, there seems to be hardly a body. You know, it's like a pure product of mind. Let's move, because we're pretty long today. But I think it's worth it. It's just incredible material.
Okay, we're going to talk about the multicolored side of the octopus figure now. And the way we're going to approach this is actually a fourfold structure. We have a vertical axis divided between physics and metaphysics. So the upper half will be more related to the physical aspects of the octopus coloration. And bottom half will be more related to philosophical extensions of its sexuality and coloration. And we have a horizontal axis of polychromy and chromaticity, and those will be related to I would say, kind of these bridging relationships between philosophy, bioluminescence, and color and chromatophores. So we're going to start from the bioluminescence side, from the left top. If you can zoom in there towards the left top corner. Perfect. Thank you, Ivy. Octopuses are capable, like other squids and jellyfish species. They're capable of illumination, or they're capable of bioluminescence, and this is actually attributed to the presence of an enzyme that is temperature sensitive called luciferase, and this is actually found in 7 other species as well. There are 7 other types of this enzyme, and we actually see bioluminescence in fireflies, snails, earthworms, mushrooms, and other sea-oriented organisms, like deep sea-oriented organisms like shrimps as well, and squids and jellyfish mostly. And I think here the interesting part of bioluminescence is why does the organism, I was actually thinking about this concept the other day, and the images that I found, they have to have black background.
Yeah.
Most of them, right? So that's not a surprise. So even we have a land animal or an organism like mushroom, it only illuminates when it's actually present in the dark. So in the sense that we get kind of a comparison about how we perceive light through the lens of phenomenology, and what does phenomenology mean for the octopus? And this is a paragraph from Flusser, where he talks about this type of comparison between us and the octopus in terms of how we actually perceive things. Because for us, we are more born as Kantian. We are born as Platonists, so we kind of almost are nested in this allegory of the cave, and then we try to structure ourselves, our own consciousness through the duality introduced by Kant. But of course we cannot do it, because we have to figure it out as well, how to do it. But in the Vampyroteuthis, this is actually reversed. So it's Flusser calls it as a born Kantian, whose Plato comes later. So basically, for the octopus, there is no. It appreciates the dichotomy, and it probably inhabits the cave. That's the way I would like to put it. And we have the figure of the harlequin here too, which is also a figure about deception and about polychromy as well. And I think we're going to revisit some ideas about coloration later, but octopus is a really colorful, deceptive, interesting figure. And it's also more antisocial. It's more actually individual, and it's all about expressing freedom. And we will talk about that later. So let's move to the right side. We will talk about its skin now, about chromatophores. So I actually placed Mansell's color system here to give us kind of an indexation of how we structure color. So this is separate to Goethe's theory of color, which we'll look at later. But this whole idea about chromatophores is actually a way of the organism mimicking its environment or reflecting its environment. So this is basically an octopus is super conscious about its surroundings. And although this will be the most controversial aspect of this, it is colorblind. And when I looked at investigated more about this idea about its nervous system, what is also surprising is that 2/3 of its neurons are located on its arms and the body. So I mean, compared to us, we have most of our consciousness in our heads. In the octopus, it's reversed, and it seems like there is also some sort of short circuitry in this network. So if you zoom into that central image of the octopus nervous system, the limbs of the octopus are actually populated with tons of ganglions. So those ganglions almost look like origins of short circuits, because I found out from another reading that we think, I mean this is speculative as well, this is still being investigated, but we think that the octopus actually sees the environment with its eyes, processes it with its brain, and then sends the signal to mimic it to its skin. But I don't think this is how it happens, because first of all, it cannot happen because it's colorblind, so there cannot be an image processing. Second of all, I think the speed of it kind of gives it away, so I think it's more reflexive the way it's done. So these ganglions that are produced, or they are placed along the limbs, they have to operate short circuits, so the skin immediately needs to react to its environment. So probably it's a reflex mechanism that the octopus triggers without even needing to see the coloration of its surrounding. So the skin has intelligence basically built into it with a lot of reflexive reaction. And this is done with chromatophores. So if you go down, we see them in action. This is also another interesting text by Flusser. He says, just as our artists carve marble, vampyroteutic artists carve the brains of their audience, right? So and they are doing it automatically because the skin has intelligence built into it. It's almost like a bio shell, bio suit, so to speak. And the way the skin works, if we move to the diagram on the right, we actually have a few layers. There's also this, we can also capture maybe the quote by Gottfried Smith on top of it. So it's actually these expanding and contracting irises, almost like, so these are like millions of eyes built under the epidermis layer. And they can either appear aggregated, which we could call as contracted, or they could be dispersed, where they're actually almost like growing like algae cells underneath the skin. And the more dispersed they appear, the more darker tones the octopus can acquire. And if they're aggregated, we get more of a lighter tone. So it's actually a mechanism to control coloration. And I also included on the top, so this was the quote by Gottfried Smith. Those muscles are controlled by the brain. They stretch the sac to make its color visible or relax it for the opposite effect. I'm not actually sure it's controlled by the brain or what he means by the brain. So if we are thinking about its nervous system, that there needs to be some short circuitry, because the whole animal is lacking bony structure, and probably the brain is more like a network of like thousands of ganglions. So its consciousness is not just on its head, inside of its head. It's actually 2/3 of it on its limbs. I have another quote on top of this. Maybe we finish this quadrant with that if we move. Yeah, so it's here we are. This is from Détienne Cunning Intelligence. So it's about the automatic nature of the octopus being able to imitate the color of the creatures and things which it approaches. And it's a being of the night, right? So it lives in the dark. And that's why it's both bioluminescent and it's capable of mimicking its surroundings. So that's the physical aspect of the octopus figure. If we move to the bottom left quadrant now, we can look at maybe its sexuality and how kind of gives us an interesting perspective to philosophy as well. First off, we can start with, as I mentioned, it's octopus is it's related to, similar to the figure of the harlequin as well, and it's deceptive, and it can achieve this by its ink, right? This dark liquid, a viscous cloud, enables it both to elude its enemies and to capture its adversaries, which become its victims as if in a net. So it's probably another way of externalizing darkness. So it can both light its environment and also make it dark as well. So it's highly manipulative. And Flusser actually, again, here makes a comparison of the octopus to us, because he thinks that we are trying to give economic explanations and trying to be progressive in quotations, where we have this tendency towards socialization and death, where we actually find ourselves engulfed in politics of order, and where we abolish freedom. And the octopus actually represents the total opposite of this, because it's expressing more freedom that is embedded in its morphology. It's more reactionary, and it's actually resisting the tendency towards socialization and death, because it's more of an individual life that the octopus carries. But this is actually challenged by its sexual behavior. On the left, we see two octopuses mating, and Detienne in Cunning Intelligence talks about this. Basically, compared to us, they make probably hyper love. That's that's the way to term it. So that we see two octopuses like not able to draw lines. They're just coiling both bodies to each other, and they're merging mouth to mouth, arm to arm. So it's basically a super intimate hug they're giving to each other, and they're trying to almost mirror each other. And here, of course, we are losing sense of what is front, what is end, and which limb belongs to which animal, right? So there's complete merging. And let's not forget the octopus has its sexual organs on its limbs as well. So that consciousness, the limbs are not only operating in terms of extensions for movement, for hunting, but also for sexuality, for deception as well, right? For chromatophores as well. So it's the limbs are highly functional organs. Now, because of all this sexuality, this idea actually opened up the discussion of polarity, and this is also coined by Flusser. Basically, there's a description of the orgasm for the octopus, how two opposites or the opposition is resolved in the octopus somehow, and maybe we can connect this to the notion of orgasmal forces postulated by Schelling's Naturphilosophie. I didn't want to read this extensive quotes, but I think this is probably one of my favorite from his philosophical texts from the Ages of the World. He says, in this constant alternation of going out and coming back, expansion and contraction, matter is more and more prepared to become external figure in the indwelling spirit, which, since it cannot produce utter unity, the negation of all multiplicity, attempts to act architectonically in order to assert unity in this multiplicity and hence to produce a system. At its first genesis, the structure of the universe clearly enough shows the presence of an inner spiritual potency, but the contribution and auxiliary influence of an unreasonable or irrational principle that could only be delimited but never overwhelmed is just as unmistakable. Hence, the organic laws of the structure of the universe are hardly fathomable with such simple relationships as have been hitherto attempted. And in no case can these organic laws be developed just out of concepts. Rather, they can only be developed out of the actuality itself. But an abiding configuration is not possible in the present moment, for in precise proportion to the extent that the whole is brought to the highest unfolding, the orgasm of forces increases in all of its parts, so that the attracting force itself finally trembles for its existence and fears that chaos, which is already present in the particulars is present in the whole. So this is basically the core of Schelling's philosophy, the situation of the polar forces in the absolute and their constant struggle, which he calls as the orgasm of forces that intensifies. So as this tension is broken in the absolute, we actually not only get space and time, but we also get the establishment of the organic laws that are developed out of concepts. So they cannot be just potentiality, because they cannot manifest any type of structure for nature. They have to become actual. And this polar structure is highly influential in the structure of Romanticism, which also Harlequin is a pretty prominent figure. And so is the octopus. So if we move down to the logic of color concepts, I wanted to present this before I talk about Goethe's theory of color and the octopus's color. But basically the notion of polarity, which we will later revisit in Goethe's theory of color, is a central principle for this type of opposite structure of natural phenomena. But Wittgenstein here gives us an interesting perspective to any theory of color, any theory on color, basically, or the way Goethe calls it, it's a treatise theory on color, because Wittgenstein says, how can we actually talk about color when we don't know what we are seeing is, or how we are describing what we are seeing, or whether there is any consistency, right? So there's a risk of vagueness in this sort of approach or formulation on color. So that's why he investigates kind of the speculative work on the logic of color concepts. So he attributes it not on theory but on concept. So he starts asking some questions and starts formulating very interesting speculations. And he says basically about the luminosity, a luminous body can appear white but neither brown nor gray, right? So why don't we get light in a shade, but we always perceive it as white? Whatever looks luminous does not look gray. And there's a distribution of lightness, light to be the light from a luminous body. And I think he is aware of the problems of phenomenology, how we need to approach it, maybe through our subjectivity, because color is a highly subjective phenomenon. But it can also create more phenomenological problems for us, because there is no experimentum cruci. So psychology connects what is experienced with something physical, but we connect what is experienced with what is experienced, right? So we are always talking about something that is experienced. So how do we ground it into something that is objective? So in a sense, Wittgenstein is pointing to the core of the problem. Like, in order to talk about colors, we have to talk about concepts, and we have to find our way towards a structure that might help us approach this. So in a sense, I think he's maybe becoming a bit more Kantian here, like not enabling any type of approach to the absolute, but more about like that type of split and a field that is only speculative. So let's move to Goethe's theory of color on the right side, and let's talk about color. So we're going to start on the top. So just like Wittgenstein, I think Goethe shows a lot of awareness of this problem of looking for a metaphysical formulae for color, and there's a danger that is vagueness. He's aware of this because we are subjective to our own subjectivity. So basically any type of metaphysical formula might destroy the inward life to offer from without an insufficient substitute for it, right? So if we try to restrict everything to a formula, we might actually exclude ourselves from appreciating or perceiving it aesthetically, I think. So this is a highly aesthetic theory on color. And we can understand it from his like two types of experiments. He does subjective experiments with cards and glass prisms, where we actually, if all of us did these experiments, we might see different things. So I call these dynamic phenomena. And he tries to balance these or counter these with what he calls his objective experiments using sunlight and glass prisms. And I call these fixed phenomena, but still they're under some scrutiny because these might have slight deviations, and Goethe talks about this as well, like based on the time of the day, the part of the hemisphere. So establishing some consistency is highly difficult. So for the subjective experiments, he not only devises these cards, these colored cards, providing borders between white and black that produce kind of dynamic effects on the border, where he also experiences color mixing. And these experiments are verified with a lot of case studies, right? So Goethe is meticulous here in devising these experiments in a way to verify the previous experiment. So every subsequent experiment actually builds upon to the one before it. And all these cards are dynamically testing how we perceive them. So if we are seeing similar appearance of colors, so maybe we are actually getting to some sort of consistency despite our subjectivity of the perception. And he also talks a lot about individual effects of the color. So I think this also goes along with the subjective experiment. So basically when he talks about red, he says the effect of this color is as peculiar as its nature. It conveys an impression of gravity and dignity, and at the same time of grace and attractiveness. The first in its dark, deep state, the latter in its light, attenuated tint, and thus the dignity of age and the amiableness of youth may adorn itself with degrees of the same hue, right? So for every time he's talking about an individual color, he's aware of its dynamic appearance, but also he's questioning what kind of subjective impression it creates on us, because we are part of the instrument itself. So we are also like a prism ourselves, right? So we are seeing things through the prism, and we are an instrument. So we have to be used here. We have to be part of this phenomenological experiment or venture almost. And when he talks about the objective experiments, he considers this as necessary because they have to be unified with the subjective experiments and they have to support each other. So we are actually looking at twin phenomena. So we are looking at color from two sides. The objective needs to support the subjective. And there's, Goethe's theory of color is structured around the notion of polarity. So it's not only experimented along the borders of white and black, but also all the colors that appear, they have to be structured in a polar manner. So they have to offer a complete structure. And I'll get to that in a second. But when we think about the objective, Goethe finds more consistency for the oxidation of metals. Basically, the heating of polished steel kind of produces these gradients of coloration that is somehow related to the material properties as well, right? So that there's some sort of interiority reflected on the exterior, like how we see the intensification of colors as well. So if you move to the left, let's talk about Goethe's color wheel. So I think this is the pinnacle of Goethe's theory of color, because the structuring of the color wheel needs to be symmetric, needs to be polarized, needs to be polar based, and we get not 7 colors like Newton's color wheel, which is asymmetrical. Goethe's color wheel is fully symmetrical, and all the colors appear in antagonistic positioning. And we don't get a red, green, blue structure. We actually get a red, yellow, and blue structure, which is super interesting. So for Goethe, the green has the most calming effect. Probably that's why we see it in plants. But he says the color needs to intensify, and this is also something, the intensification of coloration also appears in nature, in animals, in plants, particularly fruits and flowers. And there are 2 routes to it, and if we go from yellow to yellow-red and towards red, that's one way of intensifying of color, and the other one is through blue, through blue-red and red. So the trajectory points towards red, basically. And he does these observations through the experiments to verify these polar relationships between red and green, orange, let's call it orange, yellow, red as orange, orange and blue, and yellow and purple. And he considers this a chromatic circle might be made for this purpose, not confined like our own to the leading colors, but exhibiting them with their transitions in an unbroken series. So this is, I think, really important for Goethe. It needs to color, needs to present, I mean, this theory needs to present a complete structure so that it could be used instrumentally. So we now observe that the demand for completeness, which is inherent in the organ, frees us from this restraint. The eye believes itself by producing the opposite of the single color forced upon it, and thus attains the entire impression, which is so satisfactory to it, right? So this is basically Goethe signifying the eye as the organ, as the instrument as well. So since there's an effect. What we see is created in an afterglow. I didn't include those diagrams, but the eye in its resting state actually creates the opposite of the colors that it perceives. It also somehow for Goethe verifies that this polar relationship is also established in the organ itself. Mm-hmm. And I'm losing the board, but maybe we start sharing the screen. Okay. So there's one more quote there. Nature tends to emancipate the sense from confined impressions by suggesting and producing the whole, and that in this instant we have a natural phenomenon immediately applicable to aesthetic purposes, right? So why do we need this structure? Why do we need completeness? Because we need a system for aesthetics. I think that's the reason why the color wheel is symmetrical. And this is, I have two more quotes here. I'll talk briefly about them. Basically, the extension of color to morphology. Goethe thinks that even in quadrupeds, the spots of the skin have a relation with the parts underneath them. So this goes on to verify the potentiality of the chromatophores in octopuses. So the outer skin, basically, maybe as a reflexive organ, needs to be connected to the morphology of the animal. And here, true observers of nature, however they may differ in opinion in other respects, will agree that all which presents itself as appearance, all that we meet with as phenomenon, must either indicate an original division which is capable of union, or an original unity which admits of division, and that the phenomenon will present itself accordingly. To divide the united, to unite the divided, is the life of nature. This is the eternal systole and diastole, the eternal contraction and expansion, the inspiration and expiration of the world in which we live and move. So that's basically the core of Goethean morphology, polarity. So if Goethe wants to base a theory on color, it needs to be structured around the same notion. So the colors have to be established through polar relationships, and that's why we get a symmetrical color wheel.
Cool. Can we zoom out, see the whole quadrant? Okay, let's see what this means, because this Kantian creature, well, and that's a very interesting opposition by Flusser, because with the allegory of the cave, you have the fire, the puppet, and then the shadow. And I'm basically saying, well, let's put the fire and the puppet together, and then we get a Kantian creature. And it casts shadows by ink, it's sort of so it's luminous. It's luminous.
Yeah.
So that's what the right side of the top explains how it can be luminous. So and the shock is, of course, that the luminosity is not really controlled by the brain, but it's reflexive. So it is done by the arms. The arms are a screen, so we got the connection between appearance and.
I mean, this is speculative, though. I'm speculating there. But I think it needs to be reflexive, and there has to be short circuits.
And Godfrey Smith as well. It's and there's I have a number of articles on the seeing of the skin, The skin sees. It cannot focus. So if you put it in front of a checkerboard, it doesn't become a checkerboard. If you put it in front of let's say advertising, it doesn't change into the letters. It cannot read the letters, but it can read a rock, and it can read certain patterns. Of course, the chromatophores have a certain range. I don't think it's important to it's clear that it's reflexive, and because it is immediate. What it really means is that there's no phenomenology in the sense that it's not experienced. And so if you dress up in a screen, if you become a screen, because all this sounds extremely phenomenological, because it's a born Kantian, so it's purely subjective, but there's no depth to it. There's no depth. There's no subjective depth to it. The only depth is that of its skin. And the shocking thing is that Wittgenstein exactly understands that by looking at Goethe's theory, because it's a complete theory of color that cannot be quoted. So that you cannot use Goethe's theory of color. And that's pretty shocking. I mean, I think Wittgenstein actually says it links experience to experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so it doesn't understand experience. It doesn't put anything underneath or there's no self that sort of says, okay, now I experience, and that my substance explains the type of experience. There's no electromagnetic waves, there's no, that's the real shock, right? Let's just understand what this means, because if we get the band of electromagnetic waves, we go from 380 to 780 nanometers. And that's a continuum, right? So we got ultraviolet, and we got infrared, and that goes on and on till the things we cannot see in both directions. And then we cut it out. We actually cut out the band, and we put the two ends together.
I mean, in terms of spectrum, we are looking at it. We are looking at a line, but in terms of subjectivity, we are looking at a circle. Because the ends of the spectrum actually invoke the same sensation. I think that's the point Goethe makes.
Sure, but the band does not understand why the violet on one end can fit next to the red on the other end. Right, so basically the electromagnetic waves explain nothing of color.
Absolutely.
And that's the horror of it, that's the horror of it, because if you ask any materialist what red is, he will say, or she, that's about 700 nanometers. And then your mind makes red out of it. But then you still haven't explained what red is. Mm-hmm. Because you need violet next to it, and next to the violet you need blue. So all these experiences are related to each other, gradually in one direction and antagonally in the other direction, the direction of the spoke. So we got a perfect theory, which is completely speculative, right? Mm-hmm. So
would you still call it speculative, or would you call it hyper or super? I mean, I was also thinking
perfect, but no, it's really, and I'm even more shocked because the octopus is now added to it, because we lack the depth of the screen. So even the octopus doesn't understand color, or we can say the consciousness is in the skin. And I'm always also fascinated by the black background, obviously, because we're still in the cave here.
But we can also call it automatic consciousness as well, right? If it's reflexive.
Yes, but Butler would call that unconscious.
Well,
So I think that means that the color wheel is so powerful, we can share it. So we can share it between octopi and we can share it between humans. And so it's the most public thing. It's pure sharing. Because you can also reverse the subjectivity argument and say, well, all the subjects are finally connected by their skins. Right, so that's the medium argument. So they're swimming in color, and that's it. So then you got this fantastic explanation of color and how this animal acts in it, because it takes on any shape, because it's luminous, and it's the whole thing like seems to end here. Like this. What would Goethe say because of his metamorphosis of plants and contraction, expansion, understanding the margin of leaves and the shapes of animals so well? What do you say about the octopus? Well,
I think octopuses, like there was only a line in passing I actually found, a quote on octopus, but he was just mentioning that most of the mollusks are capable of bioluminescence or luminous bodies. Like that's all he quotes. Actually, he doesn't talk about the coloration of the octopus in theory of color.
Does it mean that the animal is fully expanded?
Well,
can you be fully expanded, fully prosthetic? That's what it seems to be.
Yeah,
it's a fully distributed animal. It's fully distributed.
I guess it's on the maximum ends of both of the spectrums, both like maximum mimetic and maximum prosthetic, right?
Yeah.
Because its skin is automatic as well.
It's quite clear. It has all the color on its arms, you know.
Yeah.
It's not. Yeah, it's not like it has a halo around its head and then arms underneath. You know, it's the arms that take on the color. All the neurons are there.
Well, I think something that strikes me is the lack of structure in the octopus. So the elasticity of the morphology of it. I wonder if it has to do with the nervous system, because sometimes we I think in morphology we almost get like a distribution between the two, right? So the lack of structure maybe is counterbalanced by more sensitivity of the organs. So in that sense, like I'm not sure if it's a fully like on the expanded spectrum, but maybe on the contractive side, because it's lacking structure, but it's super sensitive, right? We get like automatic skin as well as like all these limbs with highly proliferous activities and functionality, and the whole animal is actually like formless almost, right? There's no.
Absolutely. Can we zoom out a bit more so we can see both? Because that shocks me even more, is that we have two fourfolds, and your Sabri is a sort of Heideggerian fourfold where you get quadrants, right? Yeah. So, well, Heidegger doesn't, there's no terminology for the axes, right? You just get sky, gods, mortals, and what was it? Gods, of course, and earth. And so you get those four quadrants, but he doesn't really sort of give a name to the biaxial system. And he fills up the quadrants. And with Juzar, we see the reverse. We see axes, but now the images and texts are like sticking to the axes themselves, and there's nothing between. The quadrants are empty. And I just find this incredibly fascinating. It's like, how the hell is this possible that you get two fourfolds? But though he mentions, Juzar mentions, I'm talking about you, Juzar, sorry. But it's a sort of rotational thing, that it's actually the pleasure side fits on the slide and the might on the terror and horror. That might be correct, but I'm not sure. It's just fascinating that the axes don't share information in that sense. That everything sort of, because that's what quadrants are about. It's like everything that is on one axis and the other in the quadrants is defined by what happens on the axes, right? So there's always mutual influence, right? So the metaphysics and polychromy, they would always be part of like one entity. But here all the entities are on single axis.
Mm-hmm. I think that goes to like, because it's limbs, right? And the limbs have their own consciousness. That's why. Yeah. I think these are axial, yeah. Whereas like color is more on the surface, more on the form side.
Yeah. I think that's you're close there. I think that could be very interesting. Yeah. No, because I saw you guys make this and I saw it happen and I was like, what's going on? You know, it's like, I've never seen anything like it. If you see a Christian typology of crosses, by the way, there's like 30 or 40 different types of crosses. And this is actually, it's not really a Greek cross anymore. It's quite a Latin cross, but it has this strengthening of the ends of the cross by thickening. And we call this a cross potent. So it's a strengthening of the cross. So you're like emphasizing each time you add something to the ends, you know, you add weight to the cross. I think it's a very, very powerful model. I'm also interested in, we have to take this a lot further because a lot of these systems have now internal organization, but it's very difficult for them to find a contour, right? So that's also an issue. It's like yours is sort of blobby on the right, and then we get also the one we saw from Lucy as a pure like rectangle, and I think it could be miles long, to be honest. You know, that axis of the halo could actually be very long, like a spine, and then you go in two directions of liquid and crystalline. We do see something similar here, you know, the soft and the hard, and the same in the color. You get the antagonism. I think what Wittgenstein calls it, color means kinship and contrast in a single system. Now this is totally fascinating, because anything that's continuous in a mono system, you know, because it looks like we are tending towards monism here, that you have a single system that runs through everything, but it's actually breaking up by contrast. So the system that organizes gradual transformations, which are on the periphery of the circle, is actually organized by a broken system. Blue has nothing to do with red. And the red has nothing to do with yellow, right? And anything else is in between. And we cannot say anything about the qualitative difference between red and blue and yellow, except that Goethe puts red at the top for metaphysical reasons. Yeah, so we cannot go deeper here. We're really at rock bottom, and yeah, that's what I think. It's really sort of this color theory. There's nothing underneath that can explain it. Yeah. There's nothing underneath that can. And to be honest, if you look at color wheels in other senses, if you like whiskey tasting, wine tasting, perfumes, emotions, you will always see color wheels. So it seems like all sensations, anything that has to do with consciousness, can be organized by color wheels. I think that's another nice thing to lie awake about.
I think that completeness takes care of the vagueness Goethe was pointing at. So it's basically it needs an internal structure.
Yeah, it refers to itself.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's what it does. Proves itself. It's just unacceptable. Well, to any scientist. I mean, you can see the same in philosophy. You get continental and analytical, and it just stops with consciousness.
Mm.
It just stops there, So that is just there's nothing you can explain there. Nothing, except that it might be structured by color. So what I find really interesting is that we got these robots in soft and hard, and then we got Lucy organizing light, by liquid and crystalline, and the breaking up of color and understanding of vibrancy and all these things, and then we sort of see that in Octopus, in a most extreme version. Completely philosophical animal.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
It just creates its own philosophical system.
Well, that's
Orgasmic philosophy. That's what I.
that's very well put. It creates its own philosophy. Yeah. Well, yes. Well, I do think that, of course, Romanticism is a generative philosophy. It wants to understand how things go from nothing to something, right? So, I don't think Flusser cares a lot about that, and so I do think it's another type of orgasmic philosophy. I'm not sure if the sexuality and the devouring and the kissing that we see in octopi can be completely explained by Schelling.
Yeah. Yeah.
What I do think is that Flusser suggests this has to do with media. Of course, he's a media theorist. He's a theorist of technology, and he did one sidestep, and that was the vampire squid. And it's already within his body of work. It's very difficult to understand what this is, and it seems to be a speculation on media and on social media. Now, this is a book from the 1980s, so there were no social media. But sort of all these creatures being luminous, to me it seems to suggest like Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest. Mm-hmm. Sort of identities that need to be liked.
I also thought the arcade statement was somehow similar too. Like these luminous objects. They're kind of inside these glasses, and they're presented. They try to attract. So I think that's maybe somehow relevant to today's media as well, a little bit.
Yeah.
So like people trying to be octopuses.
Yeah. But that says a lot about deceit and fake news and appearances and.
Mm-hmm.
Is it? Did you say it was a reactionary animal?
Yeah, that was from Flusser.
Yeah.
I mean, contrasting our progressive attitude towards economical explanations, towards socialization and death. It was trying to. The octopus is kind of rebellious, and it wants to express its individuality and freedom, and kind of resists socialization. Yeah, socialism and resists order.
Oh, it's anarchic too.
Yeah,
so it's totally like
politics of anarchy.
Yeah, it's totally surrealist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I get that.
But I'm not sure if, I mean, like I wouldn't call it surrealism per se, because I mean Goethe's theory is not surrealism. I think it's like a bit maybe superrealism or hyperrealism.
Well, surrealism actually means superrealism.
Yeah, so superrealism.
Yeah, sur, the French sur means super, means higher. Yeah, it's just not like
I mean,
we would.
I was thinking it's like speculative because we have speculative realism, but I would like to differentiate Goethe somewhere else, I think, because he didn't have that in mind.
Well, speculative realism means how the hell do we write about it?
Well,
yeah, that's what it means. It means that you're grasping that you have to be speculative when you want to be a realist. That's what it says. It's the opposite of objectivism, right? So it doesn't say, look, we're subjective, so we're writing from our point of view. No, it wants to write about things, but it doesn't want to write about things as being objective. They're objects, but they radiate images. So we have to be speculative.
I thought Wittgenstein is more on that side.
Well, maybe the later Wittgenstein, but certainly not the early Wittgenstein, who talks about words as pictures. Mm-hmm. Right. So there's always two Wittgensteins. Actually, the one that writes about Goethe is the later one. Yeah. No, it's clearly a surrealism. Every time you write about things, you slip away. Right. But that's what surrealism means. Slip away over images. And then you come to an aesthetic system, right? That's what Graham Harman said after. I mean, it's not just Harman's, it's actually an earlier. It's like aesthetics is first philosophy. So that means that's from Aristotle, you know, when aesthetics is first philosophy, there's nothing underneath, right? And that means it's its own system. It's its own system. Everything is derived from that. And it's quite clear that the color wheel, and whatever it is, you know, and it's how it breaks and how it gradually connects. It's both a pluralism as well as a monism. You know, you cannot approach it with both terms, with either of those. It's very powerful, but it's not influential. Is that a possibility to just call something powerful but not influential?
Well, it was influential to a lot of artists like Otto Runge as well.
Oh, so, yeah, no, for sure, for artists.
So, I mean, I think Color Wheel probably introduced them to, you know, create their own systems of plurality. So
that's clear. If you look at J.M.W. Turner, but then we go from image to image. And there's where the slipping occurs. You know, you slip over images. Anyway, I don't want to. We're 3.5 hours, so I do want to apologize, and I'm afraid next time it will be worse.
It was worth it.
I'm totally impressed with the figures, guys. I'm really, this is quite a stunning thing, and I really want to spend the next 2 weeks on trying to understand what we have, and see if we can sort of, well, maybe not classify, but at least say something about the structure of it, and if it's like a whole, is it by accident a map, or do they actually need to link up, or can we separate them? Can they grow, or whatever? Can they change when you put them in other conditions, or will certain attributes like go to zero, or whatever? What kind of structure do they have, and how do they adapt? I'd be really interested to see how that worked. Can we make different combinations of them? What would happen? It's stunning material. Just anybody who's left, I guess that's just you. We chased everybody out of the room. Which are the best seminars, by the way. I just want to thank everybody. Tushar, sorry, yeah, I see you're like in the middle of the night. You know, where are you? You're like, what is it, 1 or 2 o'clock at night or something?
It's 11 p.m. I still haven't eaten.
Oh my.
1:19.
So I hope you guys stay alive. Yeah. I just want to thank everybody. Okay.
That was great.
Yeah, that was
Thanks.
beautiful.
Good job, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.